So I don't think they're gonna move.
All these troublemakers got to sit down. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first reading of the general fund budget for 2023. Do you have any questions before we get started? Hearing none, Dr. Royster, you have it.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Meek. We will begin with a review of some of the information that you received at the budget workshop. We're going to move fairly quickly through the very first part of this because you heard it basically word for word in the budget workshop, but so that the information is in the record, it's in your presentation this morning. And the part that I'm referring to has to do with some of the things that we've done based on our budget in the last several years. And then we want to move more into our revenue, our proposed expenses, the factors that have affected some changes in our presentation since the work session. And those factors are a few expenditure adjustments, but primarily an adjustment based on the versions of the state budget that exist at this point. As I mentioned to you in the cover information, we now have what traditionally have been the two numbers that conference committee between the House and the Senate has worked on. Historically, a budget would come through and you'd get a House version, and as far as education funding, generally speaking, when you got the Senate version, it was a little more favorable in its revenue for school districts. This year, that is not the case. The Senate version is less favorable for our district. Not for all districts, but for our districts. And interestingly, it is less favorable to the districts who have a higher percentage of pupils in poverty than the House version. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Then we have some other adjustments in expenditures. The largest adjustment really based on revised projections from planning and demographics, increasing the projection for our student growth for the coming year, which obviously impacts expenditures. We want to talk about where we invest our resources first. If you look at where we spend our funds, salary and benefits for our employees are right at $662 million. You all know we are a people-intensive business. Everything we do is for people, it is with people, and it is done by people. We spend right at $60 million on everything else in the general fund. Those people, and you've seen this before, they look like this. And that huge person are those directly serving students in the classroom, teachers and classroom aides. The next largest person, much smaller in comparison though, are instructional support. That would be social workers, behavior interventionists, school counselors, media specialists, nurses, psychological services personnel, media specialists, adept teacher leaders, athletic directors, and instructional coaches, all of whom provide direct and or indirect services to students. Then as you look through there, you see the much smaller versions of all the other people that it takes to operate the school district, the majority of whom are those that provide service and support directly to schools and to students. Bus drivers, custodial workers, office clerical personnel, that kind of thing. You do see that we've separated out school leadership, school administrators, there are 295 of them. We've separated out district employees that are exempt employees, what some people might refer to as in the old days, a white collar worker, a professional employee. And then there are 49 people that are directors and above. That's where we're spending our money. Obviously, the majority of that money, number one, spent on people directly related to instructional services to students. That's what the $60 million in non-salary looks like. That's simply a description of what each of those categories includes. And you see where our largest expenditures are, but you also see what a small percentage, the blue, is of our total expense. Just another way to look at where we spend our money and where we don't spend our money. All right, this is a review, and I'm going to move through this very quickly because I think it's less important than some of the information that follows it, but it's still an important reminder. We went over these line by line in the budget workshop, but as you all know, the budget workshop's not recorded. It's not entered into the official record. This document will be. So it's contained in there for that reason. But we are 8th overall in the index of measures of academic attainment for school districts in South Carolina, and we have the highest academic rank of any district with a level of poverty as high or higher than ours. So again, we'll move through that. You have all that for reference if you wish to review back through it. But again, now that's in our official record. We want to spend just a little bit more time on the results of the investments. We talked about the amount we invest and how it's invested, and the predominance of the investment being on employees, on people delivering services directly to students. In the last 10 years, the actions of this body, the board that has supported and approved the budgets that we have in place in each of those 10 years, we have moved from number 27 in the state to number 2 in the teacher schedule average pay for the state of South Carolina, from number 27 to number 2. Our base salary, entry-level salary, 10 years ago was $33,259. It now sits at $42,514, just short of a $10,000 increase in entry-level teacher pay. We've reduced student-teacher ratios across all grades. We were able to initiate increase to school bus drivers' salary, which increased the starting pay for bus drivers by 47.7%. Ensured elementary teacher planning time, developed, implemented, and grown the Greenville Alternative Teacher Education Program, which has increased 430% in the first 5 years, creating our own teacher candidates. We've opened 3 new schools and increased student capacity at 6 other locations. Now, funding for the construction of those obviously not based in the general fund, but all the personnel to staff those locations. Of course, you see an example of that in this year's budget, the continued roll up of the staffing of Fountain Inn High School. Those things fall to the general fund budget. We maintain teachers when state funded ending for reduced class size and gifted programs. We maintain teachers and aides when state funded ended for ESL, the funding that you could use for personnel. The budgets you've approved decreased multilingual student-teacher ratio from 138:1 to 80:1. And one of the most challenging groups that our schools have to work with in order to make gains in pupil achievement and attainment. Students coming to us in every case where English is not their first language, and in an increasing number in the last several years, students who had never attended school in any language. Established elementary reading interventionist positions and expanded those to meet data-driven needs. Created a flex allocation for principals to be able to utilize restricted to instructional needs in the best way they identify to meet the needs of their school and community. Relocated special education classes to home-based schools. That also increased the number of those classes by relocating them so that they could be in the school to which they would be zoned to attend and the school where likely their siblings attend if they have brothers and sisters. Full-time athletic director at every high school, added ongoing funding for band and strings. Didn't exist before, done on a one-time basis when we had funds to do so. Provided additional assistant director supplements for instrumental music based on the number of participants. Increased the academic and athletic supplements in number. I'm not talking there about the pay for those positions, but in number, to better support our students engaged in student activities. Decrease the school counselor ratio at middle and high school from 350 to 1 to 250 to 1. Increase clerical support for all schools. Developed, and this has been extremely useful during the pandemic for our employees, an employee assistance program. Implemented and maintained a security zone patrol to provide uniformed, commissioned law enforcement officers to patrol every campus that does not have an assigned permanent school resource officer. Targeted increases for employee work groups with critical shortages, and overall increasing our entry-level hourly pay. Added interventionists, before and after school tutoring, credit recovery labs, expanded summer school, and more to mitigate pandemic learning gaps. Now, I mentioned to you some of the changes that you will see. This is a summary of the House version. The House version took the current EIA funding and new EIA funding and distributed it through their new formula, which you will recall is based on this theoretical 11-to-1 teacher-pupil ratio throughout the state of South Carolina and takes into consideration really no other primary sources of allocation. Statewide minimum teacher salary schedule increases by $4,000 for a beginning bachelor's degree salary to be at $40,000, but only funds it and requires it for those not at the minimum. Everybody gets an allocation of funding for that can be used for teacher salaries. It isn't restricted to that purpose. It's only restricted to that purpose if you don't pay the current, if you don't meet the new minimum. So if you looked at the requirement of that, certainly not something we would recommend be done, but if you looked at the minimal requirement there, our district's well above that. We would have no requirement to use those funds for any teacher raise. The only requirement that remains in place is to make a step increase for the teacher salary schedule, move teachers up a step on the state schedule and the district's version of that schedule. In the Senate version, it keeps the current EIA funding at the FY22 amount. And when you hear them talk about it, they talk about that's the stake in the ground. The new EIA funding is distributed through a new formula, the new formula we talked about. The statewide minimum salary schedule increases by $2,000 to a minimum of $38,000, but only requiring districts who don't pay that minimum currently to pay that minimum and to move their other steps up by a like amount. Those are the primary revenue changes. That's simply a look. We won't go through each one of them line by line, but you have them in your packet of information. There are students' weights used in the new formula, but only as a multiplier to the number that's determined by the 11-to-1 ratio. So you get your 11-to-1 ratio for for teachers, which doesn't include teacher aides, doesn't include some of these instructional support people. Then there is a multiplier of weighted pupil units. These are the weightings that remain. So the column to the left is the EFA weighting. EFA has been in existence since 1977. Weightings have changed over the years, but that process and that formula has existed since '77. So you see the House version, the weights that it had, and the Senate version and the weights attached to it. On a positive in between the two, there is weighting for career and technical ed students of 1.2. Currently, it's at 1.29. The House version has 0 weight. That is likely our second most expensive student to educate in the system. Students qualifying for special needs services are the most expensive to educate on a per pupil basis. But career and technical ed students are likely across the board the second most expensive student to educate. You think about the equipment that has to be available to them, but more importantly, because of the nature of the instruction and the safety related to the instructional environment, because of the machinery, the equipment that they work with, they have very small pupil-teacher ratios in those courses. But it does restore a 1.2 weighting. The part that significantly hurt us in the version between the House and the Senate, it moved pupils in poverty in the House version at a weighting of 0.5. It cut that weighting by more than 50%. In the Senate version to 0.2. Now in a minute, they're going to go through each of the descriptions about the changes. But I thought it would be helpful for you to have an overview of the key points in the budget, some of which changed since the workshop, most of which didn't. And they'll highlight the changes, and they've been highlighted for you when you get in your document in blue ink. But the recommendation from the administration includes a $2,000 increase to every cell on the teacher salary schedule. Every cell, $2,000, flat increase. Funds a step for every teacher. Now you recall, steps have a different height. So some teachers move up a step, it might be worth 0.5%, others it may be worth 3%. So the steps vary in height. The $2,000 is to every step. So you move up a step, get whatever the step is, and the new step you go to has $2,000 added to it. We have added a 34th step that has a height, a rise of 1%, which ensures that those teachers receive a raise that is equivalent to or at the average that every teacher would receive if you convert it to a percentage basis. Basically guarantees they got about a 3% increase. A 3% increase for all our non-teaching employees, and for those that are on steps, and some of our non-teacher employees have steps on their schedule, you move up a step. If that step isn't 3%, it's smoothed to ensure that it's 3%. So you get the step, whatever it's worth, or 3%, whichever is greater. If you no longer have a step to move to, some of our positions, there are no steps. Some people are at the top step in their position. You would get a 3% increase. It moves our minimum entry level pay for all of our jobs to $15 an hour. That's a significant increase. We've been working towards that in steps over time. I believe our entry level now lowest wage is $12.93 an hour. It further compresses our bus driver schedule, and simply that compression is a means by which to get them to a higher wage rate sooner. To 2 rates. We've been compressing it over time. Gets it to 2 rates. Entry, $19 an hour. More experienced, $21.26 an hour. We currently are 70 drivers short, Adam, thereabout. 73 drivers short. It addresses internal inequities of principal pay. As a reminder, the years we do not include as a recommendation or the board doesn't approve as part of that recommendation, moving principals a step, moving non-teachers a step, you end up in a situation where people that are here end up at a lower level of pay than people you bring in from the outside, and it creates internal inequity. We have two of those that we attempt to address in this budget. The one for principals, which is that inequity. The inequity that we've identified for assistant principals primarily has to do with competitive with other districts, and to ensure that if they're coming out of the classroom, as we've greatly increased teacher pay, that they're realizing a pay raise for that move. And what we found there is where we were not competitive was because our assistant principals worked fewer days than assistant principals in other districts. They tend not, we have a handful for special purposes that work 12 months, but the vast majority of those assistant principals do not work 12 months. They work 10, 10 and a half, 11 months schedules. That addresses the inequity with others. Personnel for growth, with the revised estimate from Planning and Demographics, we're projecting 1,200 students to increase to our base. Funding to meet the required health and retirement employer contribution, of which we have no choice. That's obviously it's required. We got to do it. What's in here that we don't really think about, because it's in simply the personnel amount for the new year. You remember every year for almost every year, you've had to approve a budget that included health and retirement cost increases. And as a reminder, it takes effect in January. So you're literally approving a half a year's cost. Once you've approved that cost, which you don't have any choice about doing, it's required. That has an implication in the following year for the other half. So inside the salary numbers, it includes the second half for next year of this year's increase. And as a separate one, the new increase that'll go into effect in January. Because it just gets rolled into salary and benefits because it becomes a required amount that you have to spend. We don't spend a lot of time talking about that. I think sometimes we just forget that, but we're still paying last year's increase, and we'll pay it forevermore. Just like this year's increase. At least I don't foresee a future in which health care costs or retirement fund contributions are decreased. We have expansion of the ARMS program to provide extended services in the northern and southern part of the county, to grow and expand the number of students that have the opportunity to participate in that program by narrowing the distance they have to travel to participate. We have funding to further enhance school security, specifically regarding the detection of weapons in buildings. And that concludes my overview. And we will now move to Ms. Stack, who will share with you the revenue picture, which is a little more firm, but as a reminder, is now based on the Senate version. When we bring you a first reading document, we are generally going to bring you the one that is the least favorable revenue, because that's the one we want you. We want to be looking at worst case scenario.
Thank you, Dr. Royster, and good morning. There are some changes to both the local revenue and the state revenue, and we'll start with the local section. For property taxes, we've received an additional month of tax revenue data, and using that with our trend analysis, we've increased the property tax revenue by $3,007,000 for a total of $225,540,000. Excuse me. The next category is your Act 388 millage. We received the millage cap information from the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. Based on the CPI of 4.7% and population growth factor of 1.6%, The millage cap is a 6.3% increase. Based on these factors, to meet student growth and inflation, millage should be increased by 6.3% or 9 mills. The administration is proposing an operational millage increase of 4.5 mills for FY23 in order to meet the needs associated with growth and inflation. This increase will use 4.5 mills of the 5.7 carryover mills from FY20. We've also included in the information the effect of a 4.5 mil increase on local businesses and vehicles. For businesses, we used a restaurant, a machine shop, a pharmacy, and a flower shop. And as an example, for a restaurant, a 4.5 mil increase translates to a $69.98 tax increase. Vehicles are on the next page. And per the U.S. Department of Transportation statistics, the average age of a vehicle, 5. Per the U.S. Department of Transportation statistics, the average age of vehicles used in the United States today is 12.1 years, which is 2010 models. And the most popular vehicles sold in 2010 was a Honda Accord, a Toyota Camry, and a Ford F-150. So we've used those vehicles to demonstrate that a 4.5 mil increase, how a 4.5 mil increase affects those most common cars. For a Honda Accord, as an example, increased tax would be $2.40 a year. We also took those same vehicles and provided the impact if they were purchased new today. And again, for a 2022 Honda Accord, the 4.5 mil increase would adjust taxes by a $9.18 increase. The next section, which is the last category for local revenue, is FELO, or fee in lieu of taxes. Again, we've received one additional month of tax data, and using this information along with our analysis, we've increased FELO revenue by $388,000 for a total of $24,490,000 for FY23. Moving to page 6 and the state revenue section. We've received from the State Department of Education allocations based on the state version of the education funding, which results in a decrease for us of $4,056,000. As Dr. Royster outlined previously, similar to the House version, the Senate version allocates new money through the formula, which is based on a 75-25% ratio of state to local. It also uses weighted pupil units to distribute the money to the districts. The Senate version does change the student classification weights, and those are listed in your information. The difference is that the House distributes both current funding and new funding by the new formula, whereas the Senate version keeps current year's allocations static or the same and uses the new formula to distribute new funding. The revised revenue for this category is $365,832,000. And the final change is for bus driver salary revenue. Both the House and the Senate have proposed a salary increase to the state-funded bus driver salary schedule. The revised revenue for this category is $5,345,000, which is a $200,000 increase. That concludes the revenue section.
Good morning. We'll start to review expenditures on page 8. The first section are state mandated expenditures. The teacher salary step is the first item. This $5.9 million is the associated cost of the state mandated teacher step. When teachers receive an additional year service, they move up a step. This is that cost. A mandatory pay increase is earned with certificate upgrades as indicated on the teacher salary schedule. That's our teacher certificate upgrade item. The projected cost for that increase in FY23 is the $1.3 million. As Dr. Royster stated earlier, health insurance premiums are based on a calendar year. The $6.6 million item pays for the first 6 months of an 18.1% health increase that will go into effect January 1st, 2023. The last item on page 8 is the state retirement employer contribution rate increase. That is the additional 1% increase in state retirement that we have had for several years. It's expected to end, I believe, in 2024, but this is the additional 1% for 23. On page 9, continuing our state mandates, is the bus driver state mandated increase. In the state budget, there's a proposed 8% increase to state bus driver wages. The top pay on the state bus driver wage scale is $12.42. Our top step is currently 2023, which is 62.8% higher than the state's highest amount. With the additional $3 per hour, our new top rate would be $21.26. This cost is $1,089,000. The last item under state mandates is the Langston charter formula increase. Charter school funding is determined per state formula. This formula requires an additional $622,000 in FY23 for Langston Charter Middle School.
Good morning. The first item under Goal 1 is increases associated with student growth. Dr. Royster already referenced this. This item is in the amount of $3,679,000. That's different than the numbers shared with you at the work session, just based on upgraded projections by Mr. Stanfield and his staff, and they'll continue to update those projections, review those all the way through the first week of school in August.
The next item is the expansion of grade 10 at Fountain Inn High School, which will result in 22 FTEs for a cost of $1.7 million. The next item, special education teachers, 10 FTEs for a cost of $827,000. Will help offset the district's increasing enrollment and the number of students with special needs and who are being identified as special needs for service. The next item, speech language therapists for 2.5 position FTEs for $207,000 will allow us to reduce the average caseload below the 60-to-1 ratio and increase the level of service we provide to our students. On page 10, the occupational therapist 2.0 FTEs for $195,000. This will allow our average caseload for our current GCS occupational therapist caseload has risen from 45-to-1 in 17 to 56-to-1 in 22. The additional 2.0 will help reduce this average caseload to 52-to-1. The next item are school psychologists, again, 2 positions there for $175,000. The addition of these FTEs will reduce our student to psychologist ratio from 2,282-to-1 to 2,154-to-1, which will increase some of their capabilities to meet our students' behavior, social, emotional, and academic needs through our referral and evaluation process. The next item, the induction and mentoring for first-year teachers, includes supplies and a 0.5 FTE coach specialist for $69,000. This will help strengthen our district mentoring program, allows stipends for 2 trainers for 8 days, supplies, and mileage reimbursement for mentors. The 0.5 FTE coach specialist will help support our first-year teachers to ensure they have a successful first year. Tied to this one also is the Greenville Alternative Teacher Education GATE program. Expansion and a 5 FTE coach to pair with the one above for $260,000. As Dr. Royster mentioned, this would increase our capacity by 20 additional seats for a cohort of a max of 65 to accommodate the increased need that we have in all content area, and expands the GATE program to include special education as well.
Last item on page 10 is the new education funding model. As you know, it transfers 2 EIA special revenue funds into general fund. The first of these, students at risk of school failure, currently funds elementary reading interventionist and instructional support positions for 4K and alternative programs. The second EIA special revenue is on the top of page 11. That is aid to districts. Literacy instruction, special education, and professional development are included in this fund and would also be transferred into the general fund with the new funding model. When transferred, these EIA funds will move from a 100% state-funded revenue to a 75% state, 25% local revenue stream.
Interpretation services, this is an expansion of program we already have. As our MLs, our multilingual learners increase, we now have over 13,000 of those. This expansion of the interpretation services allows for our teachers, administrators, and others to be able to communicate with our parents who may not speak English as their first language, which is also a requirement federally. West Greenville Culinary Skills Sessions with Greenville Technical College Partnership for $11,000. This is a partnership the last 2 years West Greenville's had with Greenville Tech. It's a cohort of 12 students who spends 90 minutes at Greenville Tech receiving hands-on instruction and training from professional chefs. Funding pays for stipends, curriculum materials, and training. The Mastery Connect graphing calculator, this is simply an add-on for $29,000. This calculator mimics the one used on the South Carolina Ready math test for our students, so it's a little more familiar to them when they're taking that test.
The last 2 items on page 11 have not changed since the work session. The first one, field trip request software, in the amount of $30,000, is simply to upgrade the software that we use to maintain requests for field trips. And the second one there, Google Suite, in the amount of $324,000. During the pandemic, of course, Google offered their video conferencing software free to us. To maintain that service moving forward, we'll have to purchase that software. So that's in the amount of $324,000.
At the top of page 12, the Career Center certifications. We've significantly increased those certifications students are earning from 601 in FY17 to 6,219 in FY21. The state does provide some funding for students to earn these certifications, but does not fully cover all testing fees for all certifications. This additional $20,000 will allow us to cover those tests and certifications for our students to fill the gap. Marching band uniform allocation at $50,000. These funds will help cover the increase of costs per uniform and also the student growth we have in our band programs. Similarly, the increase to band and orchestra instrument allocations for $50,000. The increase represents the start of an incremental annual funding increase to address the needs of both inflation on those instruments and also the increased enrollment that we have of students going into those programs. The ARMS program expansion for $106,000, as Dr. Royster mentioned. This will allow us to serve a total of just over 1,800 students a year. And this will also fund the coordinator supplements and add 1 new subject to the current ARMS program for the first year. The digital classroom management software, $187,000. This will allow our teachers in the classrooms to be able to lock down student screens, share presentations for interactive purposes, and view screens at one time while students collaborate and while they are working individually or in small groups with students. The teacher observation software for $92,000. This platform would allow administrators to implement, manage, and analyze their teacher observation process and have the informal observation tool specifically put in an electronic format for them. Currently, right now, that is done primarily through paper.
On the top of page 13, we have a new item, increase for instructional school materials for $142,000. This will increase the per student material allocation by $2 across all levels. And at this point, the increase in cost to supplies procured through the warehouse primarily affects paper, and this is sufficient to cover that cost. The next item, teacher salary schedule increase. This is the cost to increase all cells on the teacher salary schedule by $2,000 to ensure that our teacher salaries remain in the top 5 among school districts in South Carolina and help us with retention and recruitment. The step values on the current schedule vary from 0.3 to 2.55% with an average of 1.58. This local increase combined with teacher step movement will help us, will result in us receiving the exact percentage increase associated with moving from their existing step to the next plus the $2,000. The next item is adding our step 34 to the teacher salary schedule. 3.3% of our teachers are on our top step. Adding that step will ensure that our most experienced will be moved the additional step plus the $2,000. The next item is non-teacher salary schedule step movement, minimum 3%. Quality personnel are needed to maintain a standard of excellence throughout the district. Every employee at Greenville County Schools contributes to the success of our students. This is the cost to ensure that all employees not on the teacher salary schedule receive a 3% salary increase with step movement or a 3% increase if their schedule does not have a step.
The international teacher fees for $268,000. These are fees as a result of the increasing teacher shortage across our state, nation. With hiring the international teachers and bringing them here, there are increased costs and fees to do that. This will cover those costs. At the top of page 14, the increase of the homebound rate to $30 an hour. Currently, that's sitting at $27.78. This would allow a pay increase to help us attract and retain quality homebound teachers to serve the students who are on homebound and make sure they are prepared for return to school. The adjustment of the elementary counselor allocation of $1.3 million. The additional of the 15 FTEs would be required to reduce the ratios in the table below that you can see that we've put in there for you. The current ratio and what the recommended ratio would be based on those 15 new FTEs for $1.3 million.
Moving to page 15, the first item in the amount of $133,000 is for bus driver compensation for years of experience. This is just to move those employees that earn another level of experience into their new category. The next item is adjustment to bus driver schedule to 2 rates. Dr. Royster referenced this earlier. Just the final step in a plan to get those drivers to 2 stages so that we can get them to starting pay and top pay quicker. Those 2 rates will be at $19 and $21.26. The last item on page 15, reclassify computer technicians. Again, there's no change to this since the work session. We have 18 network field techs positions in the ETS department. Over the past 10 years, we've lost 10 of those employees. We're finding good candidates, but the reasons that they're citing for not taking our jobs is simply salary. Some salary study information also solidifies the fact that we need to look at those salaries to better recruit and retain those employees. So that $105,000 amount is for that purpose.
On the top of page 16, increase assistant principal scheduled workdays. Survey data from school districts across the state show the average work schedule for assistant principals between 213 and 225 days, depending on the school level. Our assistant principals work between 200 to 210 days. This allocation adds 5 days to elementary and middle school work schedule and 10 for high school. This will allow us to remain competitive when recruiting assistant principals.
The next item in the middle of page 16 is to adjust the principal's salary for internal equity. The amount is $820,000, and this is to address internal equities and principal pay. Again, Dr. Royster mentioned this. Our folks have had step increase 4 times since FY10, with the most recent in FY20, creating some of our principals to be between 1 and 6 steps behind their actual years of experience. So this number is simply to address that piece. The next item, the adjustment to support schedules to a minimum a $15 an hour rate. Again, Dr. Royce just mentioned this one. That amount is $1,326,000 to get our employees from a starting pay of $12.93 to a starting rate of $15 per hour. Moving over to page 17, the coaching supplements. The total amount here is $326,000. This is an adjustment from the work session. The first two pieces there, the middle school coach supplement for those that only have a head coach, that has not changed. The second piece of that, coaching supplements for high schools for wrestling, soccer, and lacrosse, that item has not changed. The change is the third paragraph you see there. On April the 19th this year, South Carolina High School League approved boys volleyball as a sanctioned sport. So we are proposing the amount that would provide for a varsity head coach and an assistant and a JV coach for the 5 high schools that currently have club teams, and we currently don't have a coaching supplement, and also it would provide a head coach for all the other high schools. That would be the first step in year one. The next step would be to fully fund the varsity programs and begin the middle school programs. So that is why the change in the amount there for coaching supplements. The next item, recruiting for virtual and online and hourly work groups. During the pandemic, we moved to a lot of virtual events, recruiting, job fairs, those kinds of things. We found those things to be very effective and gave us a lot of advantages. We have returned to doing in-person recruiting events, but we also want to take advantage of the virtual events. So this amount of $46,000 would not do away with in-person events, would just add to that. So we would be doing both of those things now. The last item on page 17 is the Upbeat Principal Engagement and Retention Survey. The annual cost is $27,000. We piloted that this year, got some really good feedback from our principals about various departments that serve them from the central office. We feel like that's been great feedback, and we're recommending that we replace our current GCS principal survey with that model. Moving on to page 18, cost increases for existing service and supply contracts in the amount of $714,000. This is simply to make up for the price increases that represent increases to maintenance and school support budgets and the building services, maintenance, grounds, and ETS departments. As you can see there, we have our multi-year contracts have an escalation clause in them. This is just to keep up with those increases for all those services and products. The next item in the amount of $92,000 is for a position in the audio-visual technician world. The sophistication of our electronic equipment has increased greatly. This item has not changed. I'll just revisit a couple of things. The cameras being maintained by our 4 technicians have increased by 233% over the last several years. Also, the other big item that they maintain is the card access entry buttons on all of our locations. That's increased by 100% between 2018 and 2022. With another 20% increase coming in the very near future. So this item is to add a 1.0 FTE to help maintain and keep all of those items running as they should. The last item on page 18 is a 1.0 FTE for a building service specialist in the amount of $99,000. This will basically take our building service specialist ratio from 1 to 27 schools to 1 to 22 schools, and will better help them to provide training and support to all of our plant engineers and building services staffs across the district. Moving on to page 19, security enhancements in the amount of $700,000. Our security team and other folks have been looking into weapon detection system over the past 10 months. They've thoroughly vetted out several options and settled on the Evolve system as being identified as the best system for our purposes here in Greenville County Schools. Several advantages there. It can be used inside or outside. It can be portable. It's very accurate. One of the main advantages that Mr. Forrester and his staff found was the rate at which we can walk folks through the system. We can keep them in a normal rate. It can still give us accurate data, but it will help us with the flow of traffic as we move folks through these systems. We would purchase 3 dual lane systems, and then we would also add 3 technicians and also 3 deputies that we would add to our law enforcement division to run teams to be able to deploy these units on a random basis at schools and events throughout our district. This amount, the $700,000, is for the yearly recurring software licensing fees and for the staffing. Dr. Royster will come to you at a later time to talk about the actual one-time equipment cost to be able to run this effort.
That concludes our formal presentation. Mr. Meek, we certainly now entertain any questions or comments from the board.
Do we have any questions? Hearing none.
We're good. Is it lunchtime?
Ms. Goodwin Caldwell.
Hold up now. I don't know who this question is to. Now, I'm trying to understand that new education funding for the state. Did they give any explanation as to why these subgroups were the only weighted once that changed? Who would I ask that to?
Did they give any reason why? Are you talking about the difference in the House version and the Senate version, or the difference between the two and the current EFA?
Yeah, and how did they choose the ones that they have on here? Because they only have 3 of the subgroups on here that they changed the weightings for.
From the House to, I take it you're talking from the House to the Senate version. There was considerable input from districts about the failure to recognize the cost of career and technical education. I think that had some influence on their decision. I'm perhaps not as positive about the influence that moved poverty by about 50%. What the result of that was districts with the highest level of poverty lost money between the House version and the Senate version. And districts that had a more affluent population gained money between the House version and the Senate version.
Who down there does that?
That's correct, and there was an article in the paper today where Nikki Setzler, who's on finance, said that, of course, that was not the intent for those districts to lose money when they were redoing the formulas and the weighting. But no explanation as to why it happened.
In fairness, I guess, to those districts, when they rolled out this House version, many of them didn't realize enough revenue to even increase their teacher schedule by the required steps.
Okay.
But I think we would argue the solution to that is not to take money from districts that have a greater level of poverty to fix their problem, locate some funds somewhere else out of the $250 million that are still unallocated, Julie. And we believe that there was a measure introduced on the House side yesterday that might address that. But they had a legitimate issue, but it would appear the solution to that legitimate issue was to take some money from those more impoverished to give it to them to fix their problem, which then exacerbates the problem of districts in poverty.
Because, I mean, when they changed that from 70 to 75% for the state, I thought we would be receiving more money. And instead, we getting a decrease. So do they ever have anybody from the schools in on these meetings about these formulas, Julie?
Well,
Do
both.
they have anybody at the table that knows what to do? Undoubtedly not.
Both versions actually provided us with increased revenue, both versions, House and Senate. Now, increased revenue doesn't always equate with being able to use that, having enough revenue to offset the required increases in cost. So it would be fair, it would be truthful to say we did get more revenue. It didn't increase proportionally to the mandated cost. That'd be one thing. The other thing, if you go back to 2017, 18, the Senate directed Frank Rainwater to develop a revised funding system for public education. And he spent 2 years. He worked with a representative group of superintendents, of which I was a member. He worked with a representative group of finance directors. I don't know if Robin or Stephanie were involved in that group. In fact, he probably went some other places too. He actually came here to see the structure of our budget because of the way in which we spend money and the amount that, quite honestly, the amount that gets directed into the classroom and the little amount that we spend on overhead. He put together a comprehensive proposal. It would appear that the House version that I think originated with a recommendation from the governor's office took a segment of Frank Rainwater's work. Because one of the things that was part of his draft proposal was this 11-to-1 pupil-teacher ratio, but it wasn't the only part of it. There were other parts recognizing that a school has to have a principal and assistant principals and clerks and secretaries, and somebody has to make sure people get paid, and somebody has to make sure that people are employed, and there are all these ancillary but necessary responsibilities. But it would appear they took the one little section and that became the proposal instead of his entire proposal, which did involve and include people out in the school districts. So if you were to ask someone at the state, they might very well say, we had input on it. That would be true. We had input on what was a comprehensive proposal of which they carved out one piece, and the only input we had on that one piece was when they showed up and announced this is what it's going to be. And they announced that. Frank came over and presented it, Frank Rainwater, to the superintendent's group on a Thursday. It went to the House member's desk that same day, I believe, if I remember correctly. And from that point forward, there was considerable input from people about the effects of it. In fact, you may recall, we provided you all with information that that first version was going to produce for us about $19.6 million in additional revenue. Then somehow in about a 2-week period of time, the total amount allocated went up after it got somewhere on the House floor before the House finally approved it. And they went back and they added money to help offset the cost of fringe benefits and the 1% increase to retirement. And that moved us from plus 19.6, Robin, to plus 33, to plus 33. Now the new Senate version drops us from plus 33 by $4 million. But that's sort of the short history, the I guess more full answer to your question.
So they commission these reports, or they commission somebody to do this, but they don't take the recommendation of the whole report. They just pick and choose.
It would appear that they took this one section, yes.
Wow. Wow is all I can say about Columbia. But that's the only thing I have on that. But I have a question about the security enhancements. Mr. Davey, this is just an observation. How often is that fleet of cars for the security people? Because they go around the whole district. how often is that changed? Because I've seen some ready cars on the roads with Greenville County
Okay.
schools on it, security. And how often are those cars changed? Because it look like they driving 1999 cars.
We do update them on a regular basis. I'll find out those security cars, what age they are, and I'll check into that for you.
No, our fleet replacement, which is scheduled in the capital budget, not in this budget, it's based on usage and cost, so mileage and cost. And what we tend to do is put newer ones into service, and as they get higher mileage, they get rotated down to people that don't drive as frequently. But for example, the first vehicle I had when I came to the district 17 years ago, I believe Mr. Knott sold it last week. So
He did, yes, sir.
and it had like, I don't know, 300,000. It had rotated down to the point where it was a spare used when people's vehicle had to be worked on. So we literally wear them out till we get rid of them. But we want to make sure they're safe and that they're replaced in an appropriate manner.
But I know that the
So you look
security
at
people.
mileage and you look at cost to operate. The security cars I think you're referring to are the ones the guards use at night to respond to alarm calls and patrol the schools, and they will run 150, 200,000 miles a year on them.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Knott said if you'd have autographed that car, Dr. Royster, it would have brought more money, just by the way.
I think he still got like $1,000 for it.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Dr. Stiles.
Thank you. Dr. Royster, I'm looking on page 16 at the end, the very end of the packet, on the adjust principal salary, on the internal inequities. And I'm really glad to see that we're gonna focus on that. That's been an issue for many years, including when I was principal, so.
I thought that might be very familiar to you.
Yes, I'm happy for my colleagues. It's really hard for me to wrap my brain around that number, 820,000. Would it be possible for you to provide me or with the board with a range of the increases from the lowest to the highest? I'd really like to see exactly how much that would be from the lowest to the highest.
I can tell you in short, not a number, but the average move in there is 2.5 steps.
2.5.
But we can send you some numbers around that. So it's basically all of them, unless they were hired last year. So it's pretty much every principal in the district. Now, some of them may only be one-off,
Right.
but the average is 2.5 steps, and it is every principal in the district except those hired last year.
Right. But there will be individuals who do get 6 steps, is that correct?
I'll defer to Lynn, that's possible.
Yeah, it could be, if one's in the budget, there could be 5 additional steps to get them caught up.
Okay. I would like that. That would help me just to get my arms around
Sure.
that. And also on page 17, we've talked about this as a board, the principal survey, making sure they have an opportunity to give feedback in regard to all the departments. I think that's excellent. I'm glad to see that in the budget.
As a reminder, Dr. Stiles, because I think you've kept up with that, but others might not have, we did that this year as a pilot. This puts it in the budget to be able to do it annually going forward.
Yes, I'm very happy about that. I think that's a great thing, and it opens the door for all of us to get feedback and to work towards improvements. Would it be possible to receive a copy of that survey? I'd really like to look at it. That'd be possible.
You're talking about the questions that are
Update
asked?
survey,
Yes.
yes. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you. Mr. Suddeth.
What is the monetary value of a meal?
The stack?
$1,575,000.
$570?
75.
$1,575,000, that
Yes,
correct,
sir.
Ms. Stack?
Look at this, you're asking for a millage increase of 4.5 mils.
Yes, sir, that's correct. The letter from the state where they determine the amount that you should be looking at, which takes into account population and inflation, I believe it's twice that amount. I believe it's 9 mills, is it not?
Yes, sir, 9
And
mills.
we're requesting to balance this budget 4.5.
Said that we will automatically lose 5.7 mills if we don't use it.
That is correct, yes, sir.
If you don't use the 4.5, even using the 4.5, you will lose, how much, Ms. Stack?
1.2.
But there is a sufficient amount in reserve to meet what would be, we think, any reasonable needs you might have.
Have we given any thought to using that 1.2 mills?
Anything less than 4.5 would require us to remove something significant from this budget. The other cautionary note, you all know part of this already, and you probably know the second part, but I want to draw attention to it. If you look back on your revenue, we're using fund balance in the amount this year of $21.6 million to balance this year's budget. We're recommending you reduce your reliance on that by $5 million to 16.6, because you don't want to continue to make a hole that you will reach a point you can't fill it. And the only way to fill it at that point is to cut people. You also need to look up to line 25. We've separated out the indirect cost from ESSER. Remember, you get indirect cost on any federal program dollars that flow through our system. So you've got $3.4 million this year in indirect costs from ESSER funds. In this coming year's budget, you got 3.2. In 24, that indirect cost goes away because the ESSER funds are gone. So you got almost $20 million in your budget. 16.6 in the recommended budget, 16.6 from fund balance, and another 3.2 that we cannot continue forever our dependence on those two things. So when you look at the utilization of millage and an increase, you have to not only keep in mind the things that need to be done to maintain the place we are. And quite honestly, most of this budget simply maintains us where we are. We're at the top, but we want to recommend that we stay at the top. We want to be at the top, remain at the top. But it also takes into account and realizes that part of that is being balanced on non-recurring revenues. And we don't need to, again, we don't recommend you dig a hole so deep that we're in here looking at either the two choices become a very significant tax increase or a very significant reduction in personnel, or a combination of the two. Especially when you consider the impact of, when you talk about a very significant reduction in personnel, and you think back to those people, you see which one's the biggest person up there. That's where that number has to come from when you get beyond very small reductions in personnel.
We're going to spend 16.6 million. I know I'm going to be asked, well, what are we spending that 16.6 million for? And I would like to know specifically what amount of money we're using for what. So if you can, at some point in time, give me the 16.6 million, what it's going for.
Well,
Or can you tell me that now, Dr. Orr?
well, what we can tell you, Mr. Sutherland, because we don't, once it comes into the budget, we don't then track this dollar goes here, this dollar goes here. What we can tell you is, if you look at the screen, I shared this with you, this is kind of the biggest picture, the biggest cost items that are in the budget. We can give you one that puts those together. But the first one I would direct you to is if you look in expense, because you were specifically looking for like $16 million page is a teacher increase on. It's 13 point something.
Page 13.
So if you look at page 13, the teacher salary schedule increase. That's the step. Excuse me, that's the amount of beyond a step, that's the $2,000. That's $13.8 million. What page is the step on?
8.
The salary step for teachers is $5.9 million. So there's nearly $20 million out of our budget that's just teacher salary increases, right at $20 million. That considerably exceeds the 16.
That still leaves me about $2 million short. If I'm looking at 13.786 million, and we're taking 16.6 million.
We're also taking $6 million to pay the steps. But you have to look at it as the whole budget, because again, once we put the revenue in the budget, we don't track where it came from once it goes in the general fund budget. We track the source, but we don't tie a particular revenue stream to Mr. Webb's salary or to the utility bill.
So you're telling me, Dr. Royster, the salary schedule increase is 13.7 million. The non-teacher salary step movement is 6.2 million.
Yes, sir.
So that comes up about 20 million.
Yes, sir, and there's another $6 million for teacher salary steps.
So if we don't take that 16.6, then we're not gonna be able to give a teacher salary schedule, or we're not a non-teacher salary schedule.
You're gonna have to cut something extremely significant if you don't take that $16.6 million, but I'm not sure, I'm not following, we would not recommend you do that.
I'm just simply trying to verify that the administration is asking for 16.6 million, or for 4.9 mils increase, and we're gonna lose 5.1 anyway.
Well, we're asking you to use less of fund balance this year. That's the 16.6. You're using over 20 now.
I'm not disagreeing with that, I'm just wanting to make sure I understand.
Yes, sir.
Well, if we're gonna ask for an increase, I'm gonna be asked, well, what's that increase for?
Primarily that increase, and we'll give you some numbers that more support what I'm saying to you, but that increase is to increase pay for every employee in the district, with the largest increases going to teachers.
You give me that, Dr. Royster, I would appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suggs. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you guys for doing this. So, yeah, I guess most of my questions actually come with this idea of the General Assembly changing these weights, and then also changing what they've said they've done and what we've said they've done don't seem to match. And so I just want to talk through a couple of these things to see if I can make sure I understand more fully. So if we could look at when we looked at the chart that had all the weights of the per pupil.
Let's see if I can find that real quick. There we go.
So it's in the so like the biggest, when we look at the current, that's what we're saying in the current FY22 budget.
Yes, that's the EFA weights.
And so to make the budget this year, the House and the Senate are proposing different values for students than what are currently in this year's budget.
Yes.
And so when we look at like the Career Center, like that drop from 1.29 to 1.2 is about a 7% change. So we're saying that they are funding our Career Center services at 7% less than what those services would be funded at on today's budget.
The difference would be, make sure, because I know how you're saying it, but, and I'm sure you're including this group, but others that might listen to this later wouldn't realize it. That's all career and technical courses without
Okay.
regard to where they're taught.
Got it, got it.
But the majority of our students are actually served in their high school.
Okay. And so,
What this does is it moves it from, because you get a 1 for being there, right? So everybody gets a 1. It moves it from a 0.29. The House version takes it away completely. So you're just a 1 to the House version. You're that 1 that's up there at the top.
right,
The Senate version drops the 0.29 to 0.2. So it is better than the House version, but not as good as the current EFA version.
so with that one specifically, are there, because as I talk to folks in the House and Senate, what they say is, well, yeah, we changed all the weights, but it's because we removed a bunch of strings that these dollars were paying for and requiring, and so we're not requiring those things anymore. So like, can we look at, like, were there changes to what is required for the pre-career and career tech students, that there is some sort of unneeded expense now that we're...
No, they don't require you to have a career technical ed student, I don't suppose, because there are districts that could not have any because they utilize an area vocational center.
So we didn't realize any cost savings from any sort of...
No, it just further hurt us. We do well above and beyond what that pays for already.
Right. And so with dual credit, they're recommending, both the House and the Senate are recommending that a student who is joint enrolled in high school and college classes not receive any additional support from this
Right.
district to do that work
Right.
at a time when college tuition rates are skyrocketing.
And so far, we've been able, through our arrangement with Greenville Tech, to very much minimize the cost to our students, all students. Free and reduced is free. But even our full paid, if we had such a thing, but we still use that determinant for whether they pay for courses or not.
Okay.
Even our full paid students pay very little. But this ultimately will have the effect of hampering districts' abilities to subsidize college credits for their students. Because the other thing they don't tell you about this is the state provides textbooks, but not for dual credit courses. How much the average textbook on dual credit course, Mr. McCoy?
Textbooks and any associated fees are average, I think, is somewhere between $125 and $200.
Okay. So I guess maybe if we could look at page 10, this 7.4 million special revenue funds for students at risk of school failure, and then the 2.1 million on the next page in aided districts. If we could just maybe just re-explain to me what I think that is saying is, at one point we were receiving 100% of the cost of these services, and now we are receiving 75% of the cost, and this is the difference between what we were getting and what we would need to continue to provide the services that we were fully receiving cost for a year ago. Is that where that, I
Very
don't
close,
understand what
very
this...
close.
Okay.
So right now, in the special revenue funds, when they come to us, we get them dollar for dollar. There is not a reduction, and they're based on a formula. So when that revenue source, when they're running it through the new formula and they're putting it into general fund, it's going to go from a 100% to a 75%. So that's part one. The amount that we are putting here is what we currently fund. That's the amount of current funded expenditures. So I have people in this fund.
Okay.
And in order to bring their expenditures into general fund, because that's where their revenue is going, this is that cost.
So this 104 FTEs are currently as a special revenue fund in those budgets that we approve in the fall.
Yes, sir.
And now that won't be there because
The revenue's
we're-
moving here, yes, sir. So
Okay.
you won't see it there again. You will now see those in general fund. That's correct.
You may recall this has happened multiple times. This may be the largest single number in 1 year, but this has happened multiple times in the last probably 8 or 10 years. They've ended a special revenue stream. Most all our special revenues, and you can see by the description of who these people are, they're being spent on instruction to students or direct support of instruction to students. So we're put in a position then of either we do away with those people and the services they provide to students, or we pick it up out of the general fund. And this is just simply a the largest number I believe I can remember seeing at any one time.
The others we brought over were high achieving when that fund ended,
Okay.
and ELL.
But when we look at things like literacy instruction, special education, and 4K, and alternative programs, and reading interventionists, those are all things that are required that we provide, or are those things that we are choosing to provide in addition to what is required by the state?
I believe we're only required, for example, to provide 4 pre-K classes, 4
For
or
the whole
5,
district.
whatever the state allocation is for it. Yet we're serving, well, if you figured, if we're required to do 4 or 5, that'd be around 100 students. We're serving what, 2,100 students, 2,200? Jeff, you or Charlotte? No, I don't think I'm far. I don't see Susan in here, but
You're not far off from the
we're
numbers.
serving
It's not exact.
2,200 students. Well, we're not required to serve them, but it's certainly in our best interest to serve them because it's in their best interest to be served, because those are all students who are qualifying based on need. They're students that are going to enter the system and be further behind if they're not provided those services. So, yeah, I mean, they're
I guess what I'm trying to find is the place where the General Assembly believes they've removed strings that should have freed up money, because like I said, I mean, what I keep hearing from them is, well, yeah, we cut you on this, but we also removed all of these requirements that these dollars carried with them to give you flexibility to use those dollars how you see fit. You're just choosing to use them in the exact same way you used them last year because you didn't change what you're doing. And I have yet to see a list of what are the requirements that they took off of us this year that we could have said, okay, now we no longer have to have, like Read to Succeed requires reading coaches. So we can't not have reading coaches just because they pay less for services that.
That's a good example. But for example, they could point to that $7.4 million and they could say, now you can use that $7.4 million for anything you want to. On the other hand, what we're saying to you all is we believe it's being expended in the wisest manner possible now because it's directly serving students and predominantly our students in greatest need. So that will be probably, Mr. Lewis, an unending,
Right.
Game's not the right word, but a back and forth with them about, well, you can do whatever you want to with this. Well, okay, but best practices say for us to best serve our students, then we ought to be spending it on these things.
Okay. All right, let's talk about ARMS for a second. So this budget proposes the expansion of the ARMS program to 2 locations. And there's also a discussion about moving the existing ARMS program from one location to another. But this $106,000 is primarily for faculty for the 2 locations.
This $106,000 is to add sufficient faculty to begin a stepped up approach to adding 2 sites, north and south, to the central location. So centrally, no matter where it's located, whether it's at the Fine Arts Center or League, which was obviously the middle school designed for arts instruction, it doesn't diminish the number of courses offered in the center of the county. It does not decrease the number of people offering those courses in the center of the county. It adds in one subject area, one arts area, a place north and a place south. The first year, Bradley, it's music. There are 5 areas currently, 5 subject areas. So you add our proposal, we add 1 north and south this year, next year the second one, next year the third one, and I believe year 4, it's the 4th and the 5th together.
And then we add band, orchestra, and chorus.
Okay. So that we have a full offering in the middle of the county, the northern part of the county, and the southern part of the county. This pays for step 1. And it would take, on that rollout, probably a similar amount each year to pay for it. It's possible it could be less than that, but we don't want to predict that right now because they keep changing these weightings. So we can't necessarily count on the fact that there might be additional available funding coming from a weighting because we got more students in there. Right now, I believe we're serving 400 and something students.
The current roll this year is 355.
We have between, if I remember correctly in my conversations with Bradley about it, over the last several years, we have 800 to 1,000, depending on the year, that try out. Now, that's trying out knowing that it's sitting in the middle of the county. Don't know how many we have a projection, I think, but we don't really know for sure how many we'll have try out if you go north and south. There is no reliable statistical projection on artistic giftedness that we can really find. It's just not out there. Generally accepted across all sectors, academically, it's about 2% of your population. And most of you know, academic giftedness tends to be either language arts or math science. And you'll have students that gifted in this area, not so much so in this one. And you'll have some gifted in both. If you take that 2%, and again, we can't find any evidence that the artistic number is less than that, nor any evidence it's greater than that. But if you look at 2% across all those areas, and you look at the 3rd through the 8th grade population in the district, that's a potential pool of giftedness of 3,500 to 3,600 students at our current enrollment when you look 3 through 8 using that 2% as a guide. So we believe there's a qualifying population out there that certainly is deserving of an opportunity to audition for this and be served, and hopefully be served in a place that is more convenient for them. But this is the first step, and I think it's a very reasonable dollar amount to get a foothold to moving that north and south.
But this 106,000 is primarily salary supplements for those two regional sites.
Yes, whatever materials they might use, salary supplements. We also have to have somebody to monitor the in and out at the location. We wouldn't just put a teacher out there with no one else out there.
And with the ARMS program currently at the Fine Arts Center, not all, but a number of the faculty who teach in the ARMS program are also Fine Arts Center faculty who are teaching these classes. Do we anticipate that when we have regional sites, that those will also be Fine Arts Center faculty who are offering those classes, or are they going to be the band teacher from a middle school now teaching an ARMS band class?
I would imagine not, because unless there's somebody over there that wants to teach in ARMS that isn't. There's 5 ARMS teachers right now. Bradley, correct me if I'm not remembering this right. 2 of the 5 teach at the Fine Arts Center during the day. One teaches a 2-hour course, one teaches a 1-hour course. So that's 2 of the 5. 2 more of the 5, one serves as an artist in residence at some other schools in the district during the day, and one teaches strings at another location.
Yeah, 2.5s that don't do anything else other than ARMS.
Okay. But we have 2 or 3 that teach in other locations besides the Fine Arts Center. Is that right?
One that teaches somewhere else other than the Fine Arts Center, 2 at the Fine Arts Center, and then 2 that do not teach any.
Oh, so we don't have one doing artist in residence then?
Yeah, that's the one that
Oh, that's the one that you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it does not change. We would still have that equivalent number of instructors for the central location.
Okay. And the last question is just about the coaching supplements. I just want to make sure that I read that section right. So this will, on page 17, this will have a 3rd coaching supplement, which will cover wrestling, soccer, and lacrosse. And then also, this is funds for starting up these high school boys volleyball teams. And if there's a school that has a club sport, it covers the coaches to convert that to a varsity JV team.
Right.
And if they don't have a club sport, it's a smaller amount of supplements to basically help them start up a high school team. Is that correct? So
Yeah, yes, sir. That's
every
right.
high school will have the ability to start up a high school boys
Yes, sir.
volleyball team. They just may start in different levels because some have already got players and some have no players.
It wouldn't be good, we didn't think, good form to go in there and try to start all three levels at one time where they don't even have a program yet. This takes care of the ones that currently have pretty extensive club sports, allows it to be done everywhere if they have an interest and a desire in it. The only other thing that's also in there is this also provides a flat $515 supplement so that middle school sports each have an assistant. So it's no longer just one coach working with, in some cases, a pretty large group of athletes from both a coaching standpoint and a supervision standpoint.
And are there any Title IX concerns with starting a new boys sport that doesn't have some sort of equivalent?
It does not throw us out of balance in any respect.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Wells?
Yeah. On the education funding numbers, there's a federal component of support that we get. Well, that's loud. I feel like that's too loud. There's the Perkins money we get, that's only for supplies and equipment and those kinds of things, right? So there's no additional federal support that's.
There's supplies, equipment, and some staff development purposes. And you can pay the portion of the salary of the person that tracks all that, but you can't like hire instructors with it.
And on the way their weightings are working, you know, kind of back to thinking about the poverty piece, that you're adding to limited English proficiency, pupils in poverty, academic assistance. So what do they mean by academic assistance in that 0.15? What students fall into that category?
I assume that calculation, Robin, Stephanie, is based on the same calculation that determined that weighting in EIA, which was students at a particular performance level.
Correct, that's correct.
Which would be the lowest performance level.
And so students with disability is anyone who's identified as a special education student?
Yes.
So
which is, you know, that is an increase from the top end of 2.57 to 2.6, none of which touches the cost of the educational services we provide.
right. And from a federal funding standpoint for our special education services, where are we trending?
What percentage, do you know what percentage we are with that? We may have to send it to you. The original commitment was from the feds 40+%. Isn't that right, Tracy? And I think it's topped out, the best it ever was 13 or 14%, something like that. It was under 20%. So the original with 94-140, the original law 94-142, it was 40, was it 41%? Or just flat 40?
So then I'm going to flip over to page 3 and just, like Mr. Lewis, I want to make sure I understand a little bit about how these adjustments are coming, because I like the effort in trying to put more funding in our general fund budget and have fewer funding streams so that we can have some flexibility in what we do. So I like that theory. So if I look at last year's budget, 7, 8, and 9, those three line items were $295 million. Those have been replaced by line items 10 and 11, which is 365.8 million. And so those two numbers, so they are giving us, in our general fund revenue stream, they're giving us $70 million more dollars this year.
It also replaces line 22.
Okay.
Which was 20.9, right at 20.9.
So then that's the 295 plus the 20.9. So then they're still giving us they're giving us 40 million or so more. We're getting, I haven't done that add. So I'm trying to figure out what are we are getting more money from the state this year above and beyond, even if you kind of take out the way that they've moved the fund streams around, right?
Yes.
Yes, but you've got to also remember that they're rolling in two existing EIA funding streams as well. So the,
so the two.
Which would never have appeared, it doesn't appear on here,
correct.
to the tune of $10 million, Robin, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Ballpark. Because there wouldn't have been any general fund budget last year. So there's a missing 10 million. You know, there was a conversation earlier about that 104 FTEs that was $7.4 million. That's not on here anywhere because it was in EIA last year. EIA special revenue, not EIA salary support.
Okay, so there's another, okay.
Yeah, if you go look at page, if I can find it real quickly.
That's what I felt like there was another piece that was.
Yeah, that's the piece that you're missing in looking at that page. What page is that on, Stephanie? The 104 positions and the other.
10.
Page 10, okay.
7.47.
All right, so the 7.471, and there's another one in here. Where's the other one, Stephanie?
11, page 11.
Page 11.
On page 11 of 2.1, which puts you right at $10 million, just under 10 million. So you're not going to see that on the revenue page of the general fund from the current fiscal year. Because it was EIA, it was never transferred into the general fund. It was set as a special revenue stream. The EIA that you see in here, which has to do with teacher salary supplement, we did transfer it, which is what you're supposed to do, transfer it from EIA special revenue to the general fund, and it has to be utilized for that purpose.
So then that puts us at about, they were giving us about 326 million.
At the end of the day, the
$26 million we were getting from the state last year. This year, they're giving us 365. And I know we've got mandates, so I'm just trying to.
we're at plus 29 million.
Yeah.
On the Senate version, ballpark, plus 29 million. House version, ballpark, plus 33 million.
Yeah, and you know, I'm hesitant to really ding them on something changing from the House to the Senate, because it was still a preliminary budget till it's agreed upon, right? So we can look at it and say, well, we lost money. Well, we didn't really lose money because they were still working on the budget. And normally, every other year, that's worked to our advantage. When it goes to the Senate, we've usually gotten more money. So that's why I'm trying to understand how much additional funding are they giving us? You know, how much?
Worst case scenario, $29 million. Ballpark. But yes, and I would disagree with the ding part. We got dinged because we're a high poverty district.
Well, right. I guess when we say we lost money, when people hear that, they think we've lost money that we've been given. And my point is, that money never made it into our budget, into our planning, because it was.
We lost money from the budget information we presented you at the workshop, which was based on the House version.
Right, I hear you.
That's contrary to past history, where normally you pick up revenue between the House version and the Senate version. I think in every case in recent, certainly in recent years, it's been the
Well, and it's
opposite.
certainly, when you're this far into the budget planning, it certainly creates a problem, creates a problem when we're already using fund balance for some of our work. Okay, so I want to ask about the teacher salary piece. So our state mandates the 5.9 million that we have. We've got this commentary about the House version of the budget included the $4,000 increase. The Senate funded a $2,000 increase, right?
Not exactly.
Using.
The House version funded, when they clarified what they said, all the media reports were $4,000 raise for teachers.
Well, and I get that part.
But when they clarified that, it was $4,000 that would enable the districts below the newly established minimum teacher salary to increase theirs to the minimum. And other districts could do whatever they wanted with it. Okay? And it was nowhere near enough money for us to do $4,000. In fact, on the House version, we still could only do 2, and that would have required some millage increase combined with the other things. The Senate version, I believe, the one that passed the Senate, that's now part of the conference committee discussion, or will be, changed that number from 4 to 2, but with the same parameters. You can spend it on whatever you want. The 2,000 in its entirety, based on 11 to 1, is enough money for a district that's not at the minimum, that's at the current minimum, to move to the new minimum. So neither one of them were intended to give a $2,000 or a $4,000 raise to teachers in districts above the minimum salary schedule.
Okay. And I get that. And, I don't like the way they decided how to make those adjustments and how they moved that money around, but I'm not in those discussions to know if that was the best way they could address it or not. I guess what I'm wondering, we have aggressively adjusted our salary schedules, and we have said every year, well, the state really should be funding more of this. The state really should be, we're going to do this anyway, and we're going to fund it, but the state should fund more of it. And this year, we're getting more funding for them to help us cover the salary schedules that we have aggressively been raising. But we're just saying, we're just taking that money and translating it and saying, well, because they said $2,000 was required, then that's what we have to put in our budget. So I guess I'm wondering, how are we ever, if every time the state gives us more money like that, instead of us using it to offset what we already have built in our budget, we just use that to bump another level. Like, they're never going to be able to fund it if we just keep, every time they give us a little more money, we just put a little more money into it. And I know it's complicated, so I'm not trying to generalize, but that I'm struggling with, is that really a requirement that we need to do that?
Here's what you have to decide. It's right up there in the first bullet. Do you want to be number 27, or do you want to be in the top 3 or 4? $2,000 keeps us there in the top 3 or 4. That's the decision you have to make. Anything to do with what the state says or doesn't say, or what they require or don't require. Right now, for us to maintain the position we're in, based on what we understand other school districts are doing, to stay where we are, to maintain our top 1, 2, 3, 4. We're at number 1 or 2 we're probably number 1 in entry teacher pay. That's the average, where we're number 2. It's going to take $2,000 and a step increase. That's what Horry's recommended in their budget. That's what Charleston's recommended in their budget. The superintendent's meeting, whatever that was, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the superintendents that did speak, who said, here's what we're recommending at this point, generally, without exception, $2,000 in addition to their steps. So all this is doing is keeping us where we are. So if we want to continue to be at the forefront of teacher pay, and we'll continue to say the most important thing to student achievement is a quality teacher in the classroom, we're going to have to continue to devote our resources to that purpose. And the second most important thing, research-based, is quality principal in the school. And those people have to be supported by quality services. So this doesn't, our recommendation has to do with what we believe is reasonably and fiscally responsible. It's what we believe is necessary to keep us at the highest level of competitive pay in the state, which is generally for us being in competition to those surrounding us and those larger districts that hire a lot of employees. Our recommendations are based on that, not really what the state does do or can't do or won't do. That has to be a consideration in it. That has to be a factor we take into consideration as we make this decision. But what we're saying to you today is to maintain a status as a premier employer of teachers in the state of South Carolina. This is what we recommend. Now, it might be nice to be able to say that was 3,000 or the original 4,000 that some people believed it might be, but we don't believe that we're in a position to be fiscally responsible and recommend that.
That was really passionate, and I really wasn't arguing the point. It was more the question of how we've been having this discussion about what, you know, in the early, a month ago, 2 months ago, when that came out, we were talking about we need to write them a letter, and they need to give us the full amount, and they need to calculate what it is. So, you know, if we, for my years on the board, we have said we're going to do this regardless because we think it's the right thing to do. And we have aggressively given 3%, 4%. When we couldn't give it all, we gave 2% at least. You know, I think maybe there was 1 year in 12 years when we haven't given some sort of increase. So I'm not arguing that point. I guess it's that, and maybe I need to kind of look at this again and make sure I understand it. We're adjusting all the steps, but what the employee is going to see is a step or a 3%, which are a 3% plus their step.
If you're a teacher, go look at the teacher salary schedule this year. Put yourself on the next step where you'll go next year. So if you're master's 12 years experience, master's in 13, and add $2,000 to it. That's for every teacher, except those on step 33. If you're on step 33, add 2%, add $2,000 to step 33 and 1% of the existing 33.
Okay. That, by doing that, then really every teacher will get more than a 3%. Probably. Any kind of
the raises, the teacher raises percentage-wise range from what to what?
From 3.1 to 6.6 in that scenario.
And all of that has to do with the fact the rise on all those steps is unequal. We've talked about it many times before. What we have done in years past, and we believe fiscally we're constrained from doing that this year because of the cost, we've smoothed those steps for them and said you got, particularly in a year where that might have been all they got, we might have smoothed it and said everybody's going to get at least 2%. This year, the way we're phrasing it is everybody's going to get the step to which they're entitled and $2,000. If you're not a teacher, some of whom are not on a step schedule or they're off of it, they'll get 3%.
What was that?
And they will get, if they move a step and the step's not equal to 3, they'll get 3% or the step, whichever is greater. So at the end of the day, the least raise any person will get will be 3%. The least raise any person in the district will get is 3%, correct?
High end was, for teachers, was 6.6.
Yep.
And then what about the other staff? What's the highest, because with those steps, what's the highest?
Now, does that include the movement of those that are going from the wage scales where 15 becomes entry pay? Those would be even more significant.
So, but that doesn't include bus, that will be different, bus drivers? And where we're doing the modification of the schedule, those could be higher.
I think that might be good for, we might convert your question into a written question and write back, so you have each one by category. But obviously, if you're at 1293 and you go to 15, that's a very significant percentage increase. But again, as you all have approved a number of times in the past, our lowest entry-level wages have many times received a percent increase much higher than others, to try to get them to a living wage, a wage where we can recruit employees.
So then to just follow up on the ARMS discussion, I am thrilled to be able to say to the people that live in the southern and the northern ends of the county that you finally have an opportunity to participate, because the reality is I got lots of those calls, and we've had the conversation about Fine Arts Center even has been an issue to get transportation. No matter what the district tried to do, it doesn't work to try to get students to the center of the county. So I am very appreciative. We've heard a lot of commentary, so I'm going to take an opportunity now to say it in the budget that I am very happy that we put this in the strategic plan and that we are finding a way to grow those services and to put them in the schools, even at League, where there are students that aren't going to have the transportation to go to the Fine Arts Center. It's not, so I'm appreciative of that. My question related to the budget, and maybe it's going to be, this is maybe a capital debt service fund piece, but I know that we want them to have facilities that really enhance and make them, give them that motivation to know they're doing something special and something different. Do we have monies where we are going to be able to create black boxes, for instance, and have the specialized spaces with flooring for dance, et cetera? Where is that in the works? Is that in the capital budget?
Those aren't the first areas to address. The dance does require flooring. We've got that cut. It's not more than we could cover out of model money or some equipment money that we have remaining. I'm gonna let Bradley speak to if you would come up to one of those microphones, Bradley. I'm gonna let him speak to the black box theater, because it's my understanding that's really a very small part of what they're doing with students in drama from the 3rd through the 8th grade.
Yeah, so when you look at the Black Box Theater, at the Fine Arts Center, it's an amazing space, but what they're doing in the ARMS program, I don't know that you would have to have something of that scale and that capacity. So, when you go into the black box, you see the mesh floor up in the ceiling that allows the students to be able to walk out across the top of that, to be able to change lights. That's all for high school students. But to Dr. Oster's point, we're already working with League to see exactly what is needed at that particular space in order to be able to make sure that we have a safe dance floor, for the program. I've already sent emails out to the teachers to say if there's anything that needs to be purchased or anything that needs to be bought that we can do, let me know. May 18th is the day that they have to respond to me on that.
Yeah,
right now, we're looking at likely Greer Middle and Hillcrest Middle for the north and south site, and really based on planning and demographics, I believe plotted for you, didn't they, Bradley? The location of current students. Well, we don't know for sure if that will be future or not, but to start with, we're looking at those two locations as being more central to the ones that are currently showing an interest in it from the north and the south areas. And they have the opportunity at some point, if they feel like they need to, whenever they get the drama part in, they want to utilize auditorium facilities at whatever the closest high school is, they'd have the ability to do that.
Well, and I think about what we did at Woodmont High School when we had the opportunity. That's a black box and was a game changer for them in their rehearsals and what they were doing. But it's not, it's not theater grade for professional performances, but it was still a game changer. So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking I want to make sure we kind of have included and that we're going to kind of work on. And I guess similarly, visual arts and things like pottery and kilns. I know there are some. I know that there at least was one or two elementary art programs I knew of that had kilns themselves. So are we similarly going to be sure, do we have money covered to whatever those enhancements are, whatever the additional space is that you need to store that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to make sure that they have whatever it is that they need in order to be able to do their job. Is the school going to look exactly like the Fine Arts Center? No, but I don't think that's the expectation, But yeah, we're going to make sure that they have, all of the equipment, the space, all of that stuff in order for them to be successful.
And kind of the other side of that, and I don't think it's been mentioned much. I didn't mention it. I don't think Bradley did in any of his comments. Right now at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's 350, 400 middle and elementary students coming into Fine Arts Center. When we relocate the Central Arms program, what opportunities is that going to provide for us to provide Fine Arts Center type experiences to high school students after normal school hours? Perhaps some that aren't currently in the Fine Arts Center, but perhaps ones that are currently in the Fine Arts Center. But we'll look at that. And as you might have met, the initial rollout of the regional sites is a rollout that is the less expensive as far as materials and equipment to do.
And I guess then just not quite budget, but kind of what you said about how we're deciding where to place those things. The only thing I want to add to that is, over the years, I have heard from a lot of parents who they don't show any interest because it is so far away from Sue Cleveland that you're not going to show interest to participate. So I think just, I don't know if there's a way to do a survey through the art teachers, or if there's, some way to gauge and even just get feedback from those art teachers across the district and those chorus and band teachers of, do you see kids that you believe really have this talent that they aren't going to pursue the opportunity? I mean, the woman that came and spoke said, I had no idea my son was gifted. It took somebody else seeing it. Well, our teachers see that too and can encourage that, especially if it is more geographically close to where they are, to provide that opportunity. So, okay, I think that's it on the budget. Thank you, Mr. Meek. Thank you, Mr. Wingate, for that.
Ms. Wells, Ms. Bush.
All right. I have a few questions, but as the unofficial historian of budgets on this board, I always want to go over a little bit of process, especially as it relates to I think I'm afforded that privilege since I made so many trips to Columbia during the battle over Act 388, that how things changed and how that affects how our budgets are done now, how that still has such a great impact. And it's on page 4. And because I just want to call to attention that unless they're hiding somewhere in the room, I see the table here where the press is usually located. There's not anybody there. So let's give them something to talk about other than superintendent asked Greenville County School Board for tax increase. So maybe if we talk about it a little bit, the headlines won't read that. And they'll go a little bit deeper into why we are doing what we have to do, other than all the other explanations that we had here this morning. On the millage, where it says, let's go back again. I know I ask this question every year. It's based on the Consumer Price Index and the rate of growth. And I asked this at the workshop, and now that we have those numbers, and that's the 6.30. All right, and in years past, before Act 388, that was the number that Greenville County used, the auditor did, to place on the, it was this was not given to the school district. That formula was given to the county auditor, and he placed that on because that was an obligation that we had to fulfill. So
It was, to your point, Ms. Bush, there was a formula slightly different from this one, and that was referred to as the maintenance of effort. Because it goes back to this whole idea that there's this shared responsibility, 70-30, EFA, theoretical 70-30. Your 30% was local, the 30%, whether it was 30 or 25 or 19 or 40 or 80 was determined by the wealth of the local district, the assessed value of property in the district. Then every year, the state calculated that for you to maintain your part of that effort, you are to raise taxes, if we use this one as an example, 9 mills. That information would be sent to the district, but more specifically to the auditor, and they would place on the operational millage for the district the 9 mills or whatever number was specified in the formula, because it was a required maintenance of effort. And it existed until 2 years after the implementation of Act 388, at which time it was removed. But the whole idea is still based, whether you go back to the 70-30 or the 75-25, is that you're supposed to put up this amount locally. The whole thing's never was based on the state was going to pay 100% of it. Whether, good, bad, or indifferent, it was never based on that. But we're going to pay this percent, and you're going to pay this percent. And now how you arrived at what the total amount should be has varied based on these formulas. And now it would appear it's all being driven by this 11-to-1, tempered by the weighted pupil units.
right. So at the 9 meals that could possibly be on there, you're asking for 4.5, which is.
Yes, ma'am, and only suggested change I would have to make to your headline be Superintendent Regret, conservative millage increase.
Exactly, that's what I'm.
Half what it would appear to warrant.
Right, exactly, and so, I mean, and also, when you look through here and you see that rate of inflation, that we're given a 3%, we can pat ourselves on the back because we are trying to maintain that top level of attracting not only teachers, but bus drivers and custodians and food service and all that. And I applaud that, but also when you look at the fact that inflation is, they're still going to be struggling every week to pay the groceries. We're making it a little less painful.
I think the consumer inflation index month before last was at 8.5, and it did drop this past month to 8.35.
It's 8.3 this month. It was 8.9 last month.
So we're to your point, we're not quite keeping up with that. Hopefully that will continue to moderate downward, but I don't think it's going to moderate down to 3% in the next 12 months.
All right. I think that's all the questions that I have. On a personal note, I do appreciate that every year that you put that flower shop in there. It does help me with reasoning in my own personal life when I talk to my husband about millage being raised. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Sylvester Wells.
Robin, can I ask you a question about the millage increase on like a Honda Accord 2010? You've got $2.40. Now, last year, I'm sure it was a little more, $2.50 maybe. Is this on top of the $2.50? So it keeps adding and adding and adding over the years. Is that correct?
It would be in addition to prior year taxes.
So,
But the value of your cars decrease
right,
as well.
and that's why it's gone down as low as it has.
Well, in a normal year, this, you know, like the current resale value of a used car is like all over the place. In a normal year, the amount that you all increase millage by the time you get your tax bill for your car, is still less than it was the year before, even though it's a theoretical increase because the value depreciates by another year. The true value to us in increasing the vehicles is when somebody buys a new one. That really becomes kind of the true value increase to us. But that's straight out what it is if the value doesn't change. That's based on today's value from the assessor's office, auditor's office, the assessor's office, of what a 2010 Honda is worth right now.
Right now.
Not what it's worth whenever you got to pay the taxes on it, or whenever that is.
Okay.
Which has to do with when your tag expires.
So on the restaurant, I'll use a restaurant then. That annual fee is $69.98. And that depends on what of the restaurant? What they're making or just the
Assessed
building?
value of their property.
The value of the property. So
about $6 a month additional to what they're paying now.
okay, so last year it might have been how much on this exact same restaurant?
Nothing, we didn't raise taxes.
I mean, well, the year before, whenever we did, what was it? Just use an example.
Look that up.
Okay, so is this added on in addition, or is this the, what they would pay now? Not accumulative, because I'm trying to figure out the occurring funds.
Well, here's the part that you can't really predict. It's related to the same reason about vehicles. Business property depreciates. It doesn't appreciate like your house does. So we don't know how much their property depreciates over the period of going from one year to the next. For example, industrial property used to depreciate to 30%. Then they changed the scales and you could depreciate it to 10%. Right. Now it can depreciate to 0%. Industrial property. Business property is the same. I don't remember what the rails are around it, but the longer, if you pick restaurant as a business, the longer you own that building and its contents, the less it is valued because it depreciates.
So when we didn't raise the millage last year, they still paid they still had to pay what they were paying prior to. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so if they're paying the exact thing they were paying before, that's a no-brainer. They've got that already. And then this is an addition to that. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So it keeps building and building on, well, it increases, maybe minimizes, it may not be as much.
It could be that amount, it could be less than that amount, it could be less than the amount they paid the year before, depending on the depreciation of the property.
Depending on the depreciation. Or it can be added to what they were paying, if they're doing.
Most likely that would be if they made some improvement in their equipment or their property.
Correct.
If not, it's probably it's not going to be that full amount. And it, in fact, could be less than they paid the year before.
That's correct.
My point is, I'm all about reoccurring funds, because if we don't have reoccurring funds, then we've got to make up for it the following year. Is that correct?
There's a limit to how much you can make up for it.
Right.
And that kind of gets to the,
millage, but I'm saying, once we start adding all these other things to the budget, I'm looking at how we're doing it, and I'm looking at reoccurring funds.
Now, the other consideration in that is, as a reminder, this is a reassessment year, which means you're supposed to roll the value of the mill back. So their millage rate, everybody's millage rate is going down. Okay. because we're prohibited from having a windfall from that reassessment. Then for a 5-year period, we will receive a capped windfall from increased values of property. It's capped out at 15%?
15%.
Robin? So after this year, you get a natural growth in the value of the mill because in general, the property values will go up. In a reassessment year, that's capped.
It is capped.
The auditor puts on the millage necessary to generate the exact dollar amount that we got this year. And once they put that on, supposed to generate that, and they use 100% collection, but they don't collect 100% of the property.
That's correct.
So we have some growth, even in a reassessment year, we have some growth to a mill value, but it is nowhere near what the growth would be in an ordinary year. So as you go forward, some of your recurring expenditures are offset by gradual increases in the value of the mills that you levied to meet it originally.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Dr. Royster in my pocketbook when I travel statewide, and I'm going to do the mouth, and he's going to talk and answer all these questions for me. So let me go to a different area. What is the most a teacher will make with what we're proposing? They will get the $2,000, they will get a step increase or even maybe more. What is the most one teacher could possibly make? That's what I want to know. I know the least amount, but what is the most amount? The least amount would be $4,000.
You're talking about the dollar amount, the total dollar amount they'd make, or just the value of the increase?
The value of the increase, and if we're giving, I know you said it tops out at 4,000. No. Okay, so that's what I want.
The top would be 2,000 to a step, to the cell.
Right.
And then there's some steps. The highest step is now what, Stephanie? 3%? What's the highest percent for a step?
That was the 6.6%.
Okay, and so what would that person end up with when we do it that way?
Well, I'd have to look at which step that applied to, but I can tell you that the top step with that amount would be $96,843. That would be the max on our salary schedule.
Okay, so that would be 6% of 90.
No, it would end up being 96. Stephanie's talking about a person with 34 years experience and a doctorate. There's only a handful of them.
Okay.
Take our average teacher has a master's degree, Stephanie.
Right.
What would a master's degree at 34 years experience be? That's the more predominant top end teacher pay.
Masters with 34 would be $79,757.
Okay, so what would be their increase?
So what do they make this year?
This year, they make $76,251.
Okay. So what I'm trying to find out is with this raise and step increase, what would they get? What would be added to their salary for next year?
$2,000 to the step their own.
Okay.
The problem with being able to give you like a number is because the steps vary in height. So the best way to show somebody is tell them, go to this year's salary schedule, look at where you would go next year and add $2,000 to it.
Add $2,000 to that?
To the one you will go to next year.
So if I'm moving from step 5 to step 6, and that the step value was $1,200, I'm making this up, then you would add $2,000 to that. So they would get the $2,000 plus the $1,200. That would be their total salary increase.
Would that be the most anybody would make it, is $3,200?
I just threw out an arbitrary number, but we can give you that.
No, the most is 6%, correct?
Correct.
That's the most.
I'm just trying to figure out, and I know I'm not going to get that, but I was just trying to figure it out. I mean, we're talking capping it at 4,000, but we're really not capping it at 4,000 because it could go higher for some people. Is that correct?
I don't,
I don't think there's one that goes, we'll answer that for you. I don't think there's one that goes over 4,000.
If you could just send that to me, I would.
We can calculate that and answer it. I think the most is going to be between 3 and 4.
Okay. On Langston charter formula, it increased 622,000, and we have to come up with that money?
Yes.
Was that not, do we not get any of that money from the state?
We get some money from the state. We have to send them what we spend per pupil. They are the last charter school that's affiliated with Greenville County Schools.
Right.
You may recall several years ago, we had this discussion with all of them. And we showed each of them how much they would increase their revenue by going to the state. And we shared with them, in all honesty and transparency, it will increase what we can retain for our students. Right. And I think we picked up about $8 million, something like that, Robin, to the district's budget. And they all got more money than they were getting from us. Right. For whatever reason, this one particular charter, we've had that same discussion with them. But they like being part of Greenville County Schools for whatever reason, even though we know and we have shown them they would be financially better off, and we would be financially better off because we wouldn't just pick up that 600,000. We'd probably pick up, gosh, I don't know how much more, a couple million, if they'd shift to one of the charter districts.
So how do we offset this 622,000?
Let's come out of your general fund budget.
And that general fund budget is non-occurring funds.
Well, I mean, there's some parts of the predominance of the general fund budget is recurring funding, yes, okay. Recurring revenue. Okay. Assuming the state continues to appropriate it the way they're appropriating it.
The way they're doing it.
In other words, that we don't hit a recession and they decrease state revenue.
So basically, we're getting that money, or we're not. How much of this are we losing every year?
Well, a different way to look at that would be, that part of there that requires us to do a millage increase, it'd be $626,000 less if we didn't have to send that to them.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Just simplify it for
But if they left, it would be more than that. It would be maybe $2 million, because it's all of what we're currently sending them.
Okay.
Now, we lose the pupil count, but we still net revenue when they leave, and they net revenue when they leave. Everybody's better off financially if they go to the state charter district, Erskine, whoever has the authority to authorize charters now. There's like 4 authorizers.
Right. And I know Brazier's at Erskine. I know some of them have gone that route.
All the ones that were originally chartered with us went that route except this one last charter.
Okay. Okay. Induction and mentoring for first-year teachers. This is something we've always done, Dr. Royster?
We've always done it to a degree. I think the one you're particularly referencing has to do with...
I'm just trying to figure out,
the first one has to do with first-year teachers completely. The second one has to do with gate teachers. But what we've found is the more we can mentor and support them, the greater the likelihood they're going to stay in the profession.
The GATE program are those that are not in the profession but go into it.
Those are the ones we are training.
Areas.
Yes, we're training them, and the cost there, the predominant cost there is to just have more of them. Mm-hmm. Serve more people transferring in that already have a 4-year degree in some other area.
Okay.
And the first one you talked about, that's to enhance what we're doing with first-year teachers across the board.
We're already doing something with first-year teachers, aren't we?
Yes, yes. In fact, part of their making the salary they make is that they come in for 5 additional days? 4 days. That we work with them, they work 194 days instead of 190 days. So we can work with them on the front end before they ever come in one of our classrooms to help them make that transition into their first year of teaching. and then we continue that support throughout the year.
Okay, all right. I am a little concerned about the special revenue for students at risk of school failures. I just can't imagine us not getting funding for that. I know we are getting some in a different way, but to cut these children, I mean, that just makes absolutely no sense to me. Especially when we read to succeed, and that has to be, we have to have reading specialists, and First Steps comes into play. I mean, the most important thing is trying to get our students, help them to learn to read, and then they will be successful, and those are the students that we're penalizing the most. I just don't understand that at all. I cannot figure. Field trip request software, explain a little bit to that. I'm not quite sure I understand what kind of software we need for that.
Adam can speak more directly to that, but we currently have a field trip software, and it's dying. It needs to be replaced. Adam, can you speak to how that field trip software?
The field trip software is actually a homegrown software now, and it's being supported on old systems, so it needs to be resurrected every now and then by ETS. And $30,000 is the ballpark of what we've asked other companies, give us a ballpark for our size district. Most of those go off the number of buses that you run. And based on the amount of field trips that we go, we run about 520 buses. So that's what's really driving that cost on that.
This helps you maneuver around and figure out where you're going. I'm trying to figure out field trips.
No, we would use we basically use Google Maps for that.
Okay.
This would help us with invoicing the schools for the amount that they're billed with the driver's salary and the mileage and things like that. It's what our current system does. Our current system is just no longer supported by, I mean, Bill, you might have to help me with that, but I mean, on the technical term, it's basically running off Windows 2003. It's 15 years old.
Well, Bill, why haven't you upgraded this? Okay.
But it's also all the requests and the signing out of the trips.
It is.
It's all what years ago was it's all the paperwork around getting a trip scheduled and tracking the trip and then invoicing the trip.
The clerks or whomever at the individual schools put in the requests into this software, and then it translates to us, and we assign a bus driver and bill the miles and the salary and things like that. I mean, you're talking several thousand field trips in a normal year.
Right, I understand. We have a small district, don't we? All right, thank you. I was being sarcastic. Google, tell me what we're doing with that. Is that a Bill question, or what? $324,000.
That may be more a Jeff McCoy question. Google Suite. We're using that now, but we're using it for free.
Yes, ma'am. That's the excuse me. That's the Google upgrades to Google Classroom. We use Google Meets, which we're still using both in the virtual school and for teachers to do some things with homebound instruction. So it's just the enhancement where we used to get that free long time ago. This is the enterprise version, so we can actually manage it and have some of the enhancements our teachers are using. Remember, our teachers primarily use Google Class. All teachers use Google Classroom.
I think it's also it's the backbone of your e-learning. So if you have we have makeup days that are e-learning days, that's what drives that system.
I hope e-learning is more successful than it was. Let's see, ARMS. I wanted to talk about ARMS program. I understand the push for this in the different regions, middle, northwest, and southern. I don't have a problem with that going to middle schools, but I think for elementary school students, I think that would be a step up. But I truly believe when they're in middle school, and I will go with someone that's no longer with us, but Dr. Barton, his vision with charter students going into college classes was a motivation for them to experience success. If they could go to and take college classes that we're doing today in our high schools, and that started way back, and see that they can be successful, then they will go on to finishing a 2-year degree and even on to a college degree. I think middle school students should have that option to go to the Fine Arts Center and experience that environment and that teaching. There are ARMS programs that could go into the middle schools. I'm not saying all of them, but I think you do have to have a feeder program. And I think you do go step by step and move into that final stage. And I'm an advocate for that, and I always will be, just because I've seen how that works. $106,000 to start this. I just feel like we need to really look at ARMS and have a building program where you build and you move on and up into. But that's my opinion. Let's see, question. The international teacher fees. So when we get teachers from different areas of our country, we pay for all of their expenses and so forth. Is that, or how do we recruit overseas?
No, we don't pay for all their expenses, but there are fees associated with it. In fact, there are some expenses that by law we're prohibited from paying, that fall to the individual to pay. Basically, this isn't so much an expansion of international, utilizing international teachers. It's, as I understand it, Lynn Morgan, that this is the increased cost based on kind of the number of them we have now. We do not utilize very many of them. One of the places where we've had the greatest success in utilizing them, which actually helps us address a huge issue we have, is with the immersion program at Blythe. But this is basically us keeping pace with the number of them we have now and the increased cost in obtaining them. And they can tell you more about the fees you can pay, the fees you can't pay. There's a length of time they can stay. They can be sponsored to stay longer than that, but we can't sponsor them. There are all kind of rules around it, as you might imagine.
Okay. I was just, so what we're saying is the non-teacher salary schedule step movement, that's going to be $6 million. That's what.
Well, it's not just the non-teacher salary schedule step movement. It's making sure that every employee that's not on the teacher salary schedule gets a 3% raise.
Well, I'm just
if they're entitled to a step, they get a step.
I'll just be honest with you, Dr. Royster. I don't see why that wouldn't happen. That should happen. These people do so much and they add value to all of our children. If it weren't for all of these non-salary and I think everyone should have been included in this pay scale where the legislators came up with. Bus drivers have to be taken into consideration, nurses, everyone should be involved. It's very annoying that they would just focus on one group. Of course, teachers are important, but I just cannot understand why they don't look at maintenance, custodians, bus drivers, and that we have to take on that, and the state doesn't provide funding for that.
Certainly, we would certainly agree with that. And one thing I would note, they do send us some money for bus drivers. Right now, it's $8.41 an hour.
You can make more than that at Chick-fil-A.
Right. Well, it doesn't come anywhere near the cost of it, but they do carve out specifically an amount for bus drivers. But to your point, nothing for those other employees you identified.
Our custodians, when you walk into a building and those facilities are clean and inviting, and you go into the restrooms and so forth, that's a lot of work there.
And I believe they're about 35 to 40 down, Shane, 35 to 40 employees down. But they are also affected not just by the 3% that you were referencing. Entry-level custodians would be affected by that move from $12.93 to $15 an hour. That would greatly enhance their entry-level pay.
Good. On this cut, I'm going to skip a couple of them, but the coaching supplements. So how did we cut? We are now going to put all of these sports in all of these schools, and we're going to come up with $326,000.
Well, what that does, just in summary, it gives every middle school sport a second coach. Right now, you got one coach for every team at middle school. It makes wrestling, soccer, and lacrosse have the number of supplements that comparable sports have at the high school. And it adds the ability for schools to have a boys volleyball team, some of which have a club team. This doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the supplements. And in the salary schedules, when we move pay, we address coaching pay as a whole. The schedule moves, in this case, it would move 3%. This is separate and apart from that.
Could you just you can send me this, a breakdown on what these assistant coaches in these middle schools and et cetera would be making?
The assistant coach supplement that we're proposing is a flat $515. It's in the narrative. And they currently don't have any. So there's not, in your appendix, I believe you have all the existing district coaching supplements. So these would be a flat $515. The second paragraph would be a flat $1,934, and we'll send you the last one because I don't think we have the volleyball one broken out.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaVentus Wells. Ms. Doolin.
I like going near the end because most of my questions get answered. Do we know when a final version from the House and Senate will be approved and presented? So we're not speculating anymore, and we have a definite number.
We don't have absolute certainty of when that will occur because they've deferred that. It may not occur till after the primary elections. As we get closer to that, we generally know what's going to be the worst case, best case. Well, I think we're pretty close with that now. Our issue is they can pass a continuing resolution and go on forever. We have to have a budget in place because we start paying people whatever their new wage is July 1. So our folks need some period of time to get the information loaded into our budget and make sure we do it correctly, we don't make errors, that sort of thing. We generally want to have our budget approved, if at all possible, by the date of the second reading. At this point, if you ask us at second reading, if the revenue improved some, what we would likely say to you is we'd ask you to look at further reducing reliance on fund balance, realizing that between fund balance and indirect cost from ESSER, which is going to go away in '24, we're still propping this budget up with $20 million in non-recurring funds. So I'm not sure that there'd be some dramatic change that would cause us to make some different recommendation regarding the general fund budget itself, because it seems that's unlikely at this point.
In the unassigned general fund budget, it reaches its lowest point in November, according to the charts you present. Can you project what that will be this November?
It'll follow that same line, but it'll be higher.
Yes, sir.
Now, part of what we have to remember there is we want it to be above the required amount because of cash flow. The other is, just like we brought to you $83 million
Yes,
in
sir.
capital expenditures to be funded out of the general fund balance, we look at that because what we try to do with it is take some capital needs that need to be immediately addressed and do that in a way that we're not having to ask you to increase millage on the building fund side. So we're using that to provide a stream of revenue because those are non-recurring expenses to help offset a need for a millage increase on the debt service side. But there's still money there, and we're probably going to bring to you, in fact, we know we're going to bring to you some other things, one of which will be furthering the LED light replacement. There's still about a $12, $13 million to go to replace all of our lighting with LED lights. LED lights has the offsetting effect of decreasing energy cost. And we know we got the same energy budget we've had since 2008. Unless we continue to do things to further offset utilization of energy, we won't be able to continue to rely on that 2008 dollars because we're already seeing utility cost increase this year, rate increases.
Well, I asked because last November, there was $120 million unassigned in that balance, and that seems like a lot to have unassigned to then ask for a $7 million tax increase when there's over $100 million sitting in that account.
It is a lot, but what you have to look at is if you keep digging that hole and putting non-recurring money in it to fill it, you will reach a point that you can no longer fill the hole with it. And then you're going to be facing cutting people because we don't have other stuff to cut. We're sitting at about $60 million that's not people. And that amount has changed very little, probably over the last 10 years. It's changed some, but very little. So when you, and it's the things you have to operate. You got to pay the utilities, you got to provide insurance, you got to pay for supplies and equipment and that sort of thing, not non-capital equipment. So, you know, it would be nice that you can just take that $120 million and put it in there as revenue general fund budget. But we'd end up, if we were to do something like that, my fear would be we would end up where you read about so many, particularly large districts and sometimes smaller ones, they have this budget deficit of 60, 70, $80 million, and they have it because they were spending money that's not going to recur in a lot of cases. Some of it's budget discipline, but a lot of it is, well, we don't want to reduce anything. We don't want to increase taxes, so we'll just plug this hole. Well, you plug it to a point and then plug it no more.
Yes, thank you for explaining that.
Certainly.
I did read that Charleston was facing $37 million shortfall in their budget planning right now, so I mean, it could always be worse.
There you go. Always something to be grateful for.
I might have to take off that $2,000 adjustment in the salary schedule for teachers, I guess.
What?
So just to be clear, right now we're at 14.9 mils. The recommendation is that we increase it by 4.5, which would put us at 19.4. Is that right?
Do you mean how many mills do you have at your disposal?
No, I mean what the recommendation is. What we have right now, what we're
4.5.
But what is already charged is 14.9, like last year. 14. That's what it was.
No, we didn't
increase. Just what?
Oh, the total millage.
Total millage.
143.2.
Oh, 143.2.
And what was last year's, Robin?
Well, it was 150.8.
So see, it's dropped from 150.8 to 143.2. And what we recommended would add a 4.5 to that, which puts you at 147.7, which is still, you know, 4, right at 4 mils below.
So this is what's so confusing then. So if it was at 50.8 and then it went to 143.2, is that because some expired?
No, that's because of reassessment.
Oh, reassessment.
All right, so at 150.8, the auditor's now required to reset the millage so we gain no windfall, because if that was still 150.8 in a reassessment year, we wouldn't be having this discussion about raising taxes 4.5 mils. It'd already been taken care of. We wouldn't have to recommend that. In fact, there'd be some room to spare. But when they dropped it from 150.8 to 143.2, you lost all the effects of natural growth. So we're basically, you can look at it this way, we're proposing 4.5 to take it to 147.7, which is still below the 150.8, to allow us to move forward. That forward motion would have completely been covered out of the existing millage rate had it not been rolled back.
Y'all covered my arms questions. That was good. When it comes to the teacher salary increase, if we increased by 1,000 instead of 2,000, That would cover the shortfall immediately. The budget would be balanced with a step increase and a $1,000 raise, which is what we did this year with a $1,000 bonus and last year with a $1,000 bonus. So instead of it being a bonus, it would just be salary.
Well, there's a difference in a bonus and salary, obviously bonus and one-time money.
Right.
If you're trying to build your retirement, if you're in one of those 3 highest years, that bonus money does not count towards helping you build your retirement. It's not figured in that calculation. To go back to what I shared earlier, anything less than $2,000 causes us to slip from where we are to a lower place. And that's obviously why we didn't recommend that. We recommend us maintaining where we are. Quite honestly, it'd be nice to recommend we go even beyond that to more fully recognize the value of our teachers. But to your point, you can reduce that and not have to increase taxes. There are a number of other things you can take out of there too. I believe our calculation was you had to reduce, if you looked at that, you'd have to reduce teacher pay, you'd have to reduce some of those other large ticket items across the board. Because if you reduce the teacher pay to $1,000, then you may be placing other employees at a point where their percentage is greater than the teacher percentage. So that throws that somewhat out of balance. So it's sometimes more complicated than looking at just reducing one because there are effects that it can have in others.
Well, based on our revenue, this is what we could afford without a tax increase.
Well, if that was the choice you made, if this body comes back to us, it's our responsibility to present you with a balanced budget, which we've done with a recommended tax increase. If you were to come back to us, we would probably come back with a recommendation that would not put that all 100% on the backs of our teachers.
Well, I wonder if we could explore other tax revenue rather than just millage. And has anyone asked the county about a sales tax, a flat sales tax to benefit teachers?
This body doesn't have the authority to levy a sales tax except through a referendum for purposes of school construction. And there are some very tight parameters about what you're allowed to put in that proposal. And it has a sunset clause on it. And there's some districts that have 1 penny sales tax, or I guess you can do a 0.5 cent sales tax increase for building projects. But the school district has only the authority to levy taxes on property.
But the county council couldn't have a special tax?
You can certainly request the county to fund school operations. I suspect their answer is going to be no. And if their answer were to be yes, do you really want them telling you how to spend it?
No, I guess I just was hoping that we could ask residents if they would be willing to pay more tax if it went to teachers rather than putting the burden on small businesses and new car buyers.
Well, you can't ask them that because you're prohibited from levying property taxes on owner-occupied residences, whether they want to do it or not.
Not on owner-occupied residences, but just on sales tax.
You don't have the authority to levy a sales tax, and I do not believe there is Doug would have to research that. I don't know where he disappeared to, but I do not believe there's any legal authority by which this body, whether with a referendum or not, can levy a sales tax other than for capital projects.
Well, and I wouldn't even suggest that we do that. Just, I wondered if the community could decide that's something that the community wanted, not us.
Well, the only way to ask the community is you have to put it on the ballot as a referendum question. So you have to have the legal authority to place it on the ballot. And I think you can ask them a question about increasing, you can ask them a question about increasing their property tax on a referendum. I don't think you can ask them about levying a sales tax for this purpose because I don't think there's the authority within the law to do that, whether it's by a vote of the people or not. if I recall, Act 388, there is a provision in there that you can go through referendum and increase taxes above and beyond that which is permitted by state law.
On owner-occupied
No,
property tax?
no.
Oh.
You cannot levy taxes on owner-occupied property.
A referendum, say that again, a referendum for?
You can go for a referendum, ask the general public if they want to levy taxes, operating taxes, in excess of the authority of the board to do so. But they can't levy it on property that's not allowed to be taxed. All they can do is vote to levy it on the same people you can levy it on.
Small businesses.
Which are small businesses. Or they're voting to levy it on their own car, but that's a small fraction of the operating revenue.
And there are no other options?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. My last question is about the security enhancements. I was under the impression that this 700,000 also included the equipment. Is there a different plan?
No, it does not. The equipment itself is a number slightly under that. This is the recurring cost of 6 personnel to operate it. And there is like all other, apparently everything electronic, there's an ongoing subscription to it. So it's the ongoing subscription cost for the software to operate it. We would come back, excuse me, I'm sorry. We would come back to you with a request from you mentioned fund balance earlier, from fund balance to pay for the equipment necessary to do it, because that's a non-recurring cost.
Right. What, is there a plan for how long what the pilot program is for that equipment? What's the timeline on that pilot?
Well, I don't know that necessarily we view this solely as a pilot. If we believe that we ought to take further steps with it, we would likely determine that based on the conditions we experience. In other words, if we continue to experience identification of a number of weapons coming in. But what this does is allows us to operate the system that you saw at intake at a middle or high school, a different one every day, then to divide that system into its 3 parts and go and randomly perform checks at 3 different locations or more through the rest of the day, allowing us to do that at every middle and high school on a random basis in a manner similar to the way we do drug dog searches now. We may feel like after doing that for a period of time that is sufficient. Maybe we need to add another mobile system, or I would hope we don't get to the point where we feel like we have to have that in every school. But if we do, then we could put that in every school. But when you're putting it in every school, obviously you can tell by using, rotating one between 35 schools, you can kind of imagine what the cost would be if we felt like we needed that level of constant detection at a school every day at intake. And what it doesn't do, which has always been a very concerning aspect to the utilization of metal detectors, and we know this isn't a metal detector, it's far more sophisticated, far more thorough. You can check people when they come in, but if you can't completely seal off the whole rest of the building, anybody can pass anything through at any time during the day. The ability to move this thing around randomly and check individuals or their possessions throughout the day helps mitigate their ability to penetrate the building with a weapon other than at intake during the morning.
That covers it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doolan. Anyone else have any questions? I have a couple. You're asking us to approve the 4.5 mills. You've said that several times. That leads to 1.2 mills if we approve that, leave that on the table, we can never recap that.
That's correct, yes, sir.
I remember Senator Smith made that very plain to me one day that.
Apparently that stuck.
Yeah, we had an option to do that and didn't do it one or two occasions. On page 9, we are estimating the growth for next year to be 1,200 students, is that correct?
Yeah, yes, sir. Now, that's growth everywhere except Fountain Inn, and the Fountain Inn's reflected in Fountain Inn.
Why is that different? Remember?
Just simply because Fountain Inn is a roll-up of the next grade at the school. So their projected growth covered in that number, at least at this point.
Okay. And as Ms. Doohan said, you discussed arms quite at length on that. On page 13, you described the teacher's salary, step 34, going to the most experienced teachers. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, who the most experienced teachers are?
Right now, any teacher with 33 or more years experience, if we don't add another step, they would only get $2,000. That would put them, I believe, one of the things we tried to hit with our number was to make sure we could say that there's no teacher getting less than 3%, because that's what other employees are getting. And I think without that 1% step, the people going from 30 that were above 33, theirs would have fallen below 3%, even with the $2,000.
Okay. Page 17, boys volleyball. That's allowing for varsity head coach and assistant coach for 5 teams.
Yes, sir. Those are the 5 schools that currently have club volleyball, so they already have teams and structures in place. They're ready to go.
What's club volleyball? What is that?
It just means it's not sanctioned by the high school league. So they're not eligible for playoffs. There's no state championship, and we provide no coaching supplement for those positions. It'd be like any other club activity in a school, but we actually do have 5 schools that have club volleyball.
But now they're being recognized, so they will be regular competing volleyball teams?
Yes, sir. And I don't know what the classifications are. Where's Daryl? Daryl, are they putting them in by classification, or are they lumping classifications together?
Be a single classification next year is the expectation.
So as opposed to single A up through 5A, there'll be one set of playoffs, one state championship for men's volleyball, no matter what size school it is. And that's kind of the way when they've started other sports. I think lacrosse statewide was that way. You go back further in time to soccer, it was started out that way. So that's a fairly common methodology. What we were not, and we've expressed our opinion about this to the league, the fact they waited till April to do this as opposed to doing it in the fall before our budget prep. But that's neither here nor there. It's not. It would have been more convenient to almost every district had they done that earlier in the year.
Do we have any sanctioned girls volleyball teams?
Yes, sir. Every high school, Daryl, they don't maybe all have a JV team.
Do they have a varsity coach for all of those?
Yes, sir.
They already have that.
This on the boys' side parallels what's on the girls' side. So they would have a varsity, an assistant, and a JV. Right, Daryl?
19 on the security enhancements. So we are purchasing, no, wait a minute. The 700,000 is just for personnel.
This would staff, and it would pay the ongoing software cost to operate the system, which they charge you annually. Now, they update it. We share with you, I don't want to talk too much about it in the public session, but we share with you some abilities that they were working on to add to the system, this would cover folding them into our system once we had it. Any updates they do, any enhancements they make, you're paying an ongoing amount, so you benefit from all those enhancements. In addition to, they're going to charge you that to operate the software anyway.
Is that per machine, per device, or whatever it's called?
It would cover, in our proposal, which we'd ask you later to fund the equipment, that would be 3 stations. So you could put one at the primary entrance, the bus drop-off, and in a high school, the student car, the driver entrance for them. Then you can take those and move them separately to 3 different locations using the people associated with them, and they all operate both independently or together.
Okay, and each one we're talking about is a dual.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Whatever I'm trying to say here.
What you saw.
Yeah, what I saw.
Yes,
well,
sir.
We don't see half of it.
So it'd be 3 times that.
Okay.
It'd be 3 of those. There'd be 3 of those.
Okay, and if we had more, we would still have to pay more software fees. Okay.
I don't know how, I assume that's determined by the number of units you have, Travis?
Okay, if we had these stationary at each location, would the personnel cost be the same?
Could probably drop slightly, because I think our personnel, if they were all in the same location, we wouldn't feel like we needed perhaps 3 people at the same level. Because part of that's to make sure that the thing, when you split them out and you got them going 3 different places, that you have somebody there that can make sure the system's running the way it should run, as opposed to just a monitor. If they were fixed in one building, the person that's just sitting there monitoring the screen can be of a lesser skill level than somebody that knows how to work on it, so to speak.
And we feel like we need more different personnel than we currently have to occupy, what I want to say, implement or whatever I think we've talked about it a little bit.
Yes, sir. We didn't want this to fall to the schools to do, because particularly the first thing in the morning, they got all kind of other responsibilities. Now, there needs to be a school administrator present, so they'll have to float somebody in there to do that. But that's more about the managing the people coming through it than monitoring the system. We want to make sure that there's a commissioned law enforcement officer there in the event they do detect a weapon and need to take it. So we believe this is certainly not the least expensive way you could do it, but we believe it's the most responsible way to do it, to ensure the system operates correctly, people are protected that are both operating it and passing through it, and that it doesn't put an undue burden on the individual school to operate it, nor does it require, for a lot of reasons, you don't want the school resource officer to be where they can't move freely during the course of a arrival or dismissal. It doesn't require locking that person into one place. So when we looked at all those factors, we believe this is the most responsible way to implement it.
So if we have it at every location that are middle and high schools, we're looking, what, $50 million a year operating expense? Do what now? Say increase, decrease, okay.
Yeah, you're gonna have some drop, but that's not to operate it necessarily. We think the reduced operator cost might be, we don't have to have quite as highly a qualified person on our side to do that. But I mean, if you took kind of what we're estimating there.
I'm going,
15, 30.
Dr. Oyster, I'm going to look at this as a pilot program but be aware that in the future that I will be looking to put it at every school if we can, if this works.
I think you would be looking at an ongoing cost of $23 to $25 million a year, not including the acquisition of the equipment.
Yeah, if it does what it's proposed to do, I think that would give me some assurance anyway, and a whole lot of the community. Page 16, we'll go backwards a little bit, talking about increasing for assistant principals. What are we doing for administrative assistants? I'm not sure I've seen that in there.
I believe it also moves the days for AAs, does it not? It doesn't move the days for AAs, so.
It does not?
We moved their days two years ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which we did like 2-3 years ago.
What I sort of understood. What is the difference between an AA and an AP?
AAs are paid on their teacher's certificate, and APs are paid on an admin salary.
And really for us, it differentiates the difference between a small school and a larger school, because obviously the workload would be a little bit greater in a larger school. And at the elementary level, you got to get a little over 800 before you get a second person. So it makes the difference between our schools with 350, well, we got a couple under 300, and those above 600 and above.
What is an average salary difference between the AA and AP?
We'd have to run that, and we can run that for you. I think this is something that down the road we're going to have to look at, for the reason that Lynn just said. What's happened is we've increased teacher pay. We're finding people that don't want to move from being an AA to become an AP. Where it used to be they just wanted to quit being an AA and rush to be an AP. If they got a number of years experience, they're making more per day than an AP is.
So why don't we elevate them to an AP?
We have to create a salary category, and at least in my mind, that differentiates the level of responsibility for being an AP in a 300 student school and one in a 600 student school. And so far, what we have done and what we recommended is to allow that AA AP pay to be the differential. Because if you move this group up, then you also need to look at middle and high school assistants, because the scope and complexity of what they do is more difficult than what the elementary assistants do, particularly nighttime and weekend activities.
Okay, that's all my questions. Anyone else have any questions? Follow up. Hearing none, without objection, or I'll entertain a motion. Let's do that.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ms. Wells?
Well, we have additional questions
We have a deadline, I believe, do we not, Ms. Dye?
We
Please
do.
remind them of that
On the
deadline.
bottom of the first page,
1 week from today,
May the 19th.
May the 19th, correct.
Email it to Ms. Fitzer, and she'll get the questions for you.
And the answers to the questions submitted before are also, they're in your book now. You probably already saw that.
All in favor of the motion, say aye. All opposed, say no. Motion carries. We are adjourned.